Welcome to Fantasy Audiobook, Hogwarts, Start Fusion Phoenix Bloodline. Chapter 101. Minister Millicent looked at the handsome boy in front of him, and his motherhood broke out in an instant, hugged him and comforted him. Poor child, don't worry, he has committed so many sins, and he will never harm people's chances in the future. Peter struggled his head out of the turbulent female minister and reported, I was afraid that Professor Green would deny it, and the adults didn't believe me. So I asked the horsemen to protect the scene, and the captured magical animals were still there. There, if you want evidence, you can go there and see. The female minister was surprised, and then patted Peter's head in praise. What a smart boy, you did a good job. Tomorrow I will let someone from the Department of Management and Control of Magical Creatures come over to collect evidence, and then punish the crime. Let the dark wizard be punished. I can't hurt you anymore. Snape looked at Peter, who was pretending to be well-behaved and pitiful in front of the minister, and rolled his eyes. This guy, Zero Sanchi, doesn't know what shame is. Amelia Burns, director of the legal department, also looked at the little boy in front of her with admiration and said, if you graduate in the future, you can come to work in our legal department. You can catch the Dark Wizard alone this time, and when this trial is over and the identity of Green's Death Eaters is confirmed, you will get a Merlin Medal. Then you are the youngest Merlin Medal recipient. I'll consider Ms. Burns, Peter said obediently, and even the most serious Amelia Burns couldn't help pinching Peter's little face and showing a smile. After knocking Green out again, the three of the Ministry of Magic took Green to say goodbye to everyone, and went directly to the Ministry of Magic with flow powder from the fireplace in the principal's office. Looking at the disappearing people, Peter asked curiously, Principal Dumbledore, if your office fireplace is connected to other places, wouldn't you be worried about someone appearing directly here? Today is a special case. The school fireplace is off most of the time, the curious Mr. York. Snape snorted, then looked at Dumbledore and said, it's late now, the potions in my office haven't yet. When I'm done, I'll take my students back first. After he finished speaking, he ignored Dumbledore's answer and dragged Peter out. Ding, the host has completed the first stage of the task, find out Professor Green's intentions, and get 20 points. Complete the second stage of the task, reveal Professor Green's true face, and get 10 points. Catch Professor Green and get 30 points. Ding, reveal Professor Green's traitor identity. Get 10 extra points. Currently accumulated points are 85 points. A series of point rewards from the system directly stunned Peter. He felt like a dream. He only earned 15 points not long ago, and as a result, a task about Professor Green gave him a full 70 points reward. Now as long as he earns another 15 points, he can exchange for another genetic fusion opportunity. Peter can't wait to have a few more people like Professor Green at this time, and then get points that can be exchanged for several gene fusion opportunities at one time. Of course, he also knows that this is just thinking. It will be difficult to have such an opportunity in the future, so let's study hard and accumulate points slowly. However, after Harry Potter enters school in the future, there will be many opportunities that should stimulate system tasks. Like Professor Quirrell fused with Voldemort. Second grade Basilisk or reveal the identity of Gilderoy Lockhart the Liar. In the third grade, exposing the identity of the Mouse Banban or redressing the injustice of Sirius, etc., there is a major event every year, and it should be possible to score a task. Goodbye, Headmaster Dumbledore. Goodbye, Headmaster Doris. And goodbye, the nasty Headmaster Black. Peter shouted to the back while being dragged out by Snape. At this time, he was in a good mood, the points were settled, and he felt that he could have another genetic fusion at Christmas. Oh, goodbye, polite handsome guy. Welcome back to the office. The headmistress Doris in the portrait on the wall waved happily. You rude brat. Principal Black in the portrait glared at him in anger. What a lively age. What about Fox? Dumbledore said to the Phoenix on the golden branch, looking at the two who had disappeared outside the door. Phoenix Fox directly rolled his eyes at him, then buried his head in the feathers. Dumbledore, are you worried about this kid named Peter? Armando Dippet, the previous headmaster on the wall, opened his eyes and asked. He really looks like Tom Riddle back then, with an equally likable and handsome face that can easily be liked by everyone. And he doesn't like to follow the rules. Dumbledore stared at a blank photo in the corner of the table, dazed. When that kid was favored by the two high-ranking ladies of the Ministry of Magic just now, I even became wary for a moment. I think his target is the Ministry of Magic. I think Dumbledore, you are too hardy. Principal Doris said, although that child is very purposeful, I don't see the desire for power in his eyes, and I can even feel his desire for authority. I'm not worried about him going astray like Tom Riddle. Dumbledore, your prejudice against Slytherin is too deep. Although this little guy is impolite, he is very talented. You can't be prejudiced just because he is a student of Slytherin. Headmaster Black sneered with a displeased look on his face. If Peter was a student of Gryffindor, I'm afraid you don't look like this now. Walking down the stairs to the cellar, Snape escorted Peter to the door, looked at him sternly and said, listen, reckless and arrogant Peter York, if you want to live well until graduation, don't be like that. Such a reckless thing today. You are not the savior of the world, you do not need to be the first to catch the bad guys. If you want to be a hero like this in the future, you should discuss with Dumbledore and go to Gryffindor. Remember. I remember, Professor Snape. Peter was obedient. Hey, I hope you do what you say, go in. Snape turned around and left. Glory first. Peter shouted the command and entered the common room. Alan, who came to the hall of the common room, sat by the window and looked at the ugly mermaid, ran over excitedly when he saw him, and asked, Peter, it is rumored everywhere that you defeated the dark wizard Green. Is it real? How did someone know about it so quickly? Peter asked in surprise. He just came out of the office. How did these students know about it? Gryffindor's Weasley twins said it. Alan replied, then asked in surprise, you really defeated Professor Green? Isn't he an Auror? How did he become a dark wizard? I'm not alone, Field helped too. Peter took out the sparsely feathered phoenix from his pocket and looked at him distressedly. Field blocked Professor Green's life-suppressing spell for me, and went straight to Nirvana. Merlin, shoot the death-defying spell. Is Professor Green crazy? Alan's eyes widened in horror, and then he carefully looked at his roommate's body. Are you all right? Looking at the little phoenix in Peter's hands again, he said distressedly and gritted his teeth, you should send this kind of person to the Dementor to kiss. How dare you cast the unforgivable curse on you? I'm fine. It's grim. Peter sneered. I cut off his right hand and fed it to the octopus, and kicked several of his ribs. Now he's been caught by the Ministry of Magic. Gone. Listening to Peter's words, Alan, who had never been exposed to such bloody things, couldn't help feeling chills. Some tremblingly said, Peter, to be honest, the way you are now is quite scary. Ha ha. Peter rolled his eyes at him and said, where did your courage go when you ate that bloody gory Halloween cake? Does that scare you out of your head? The problem is that I know it's fake. And yours is real. Did you really cut off Professor Green's hand? Alan asked in disbelief. It used a cutting spell to cut off his right hand holding the wand. Peter explained, and then a look of horror, or you might get the news of my death. You are amazing. You actually defeated an Auror. Alan looked at Peter admiringly. When tomorrow starts, many people will know your name. Don't be obsessed with brother. Brother is just a legend. Peter said with a stinky face, and then he laughed. Alan also laughed. Peter, there are rumors in the academy that you came back with Professor Green's body. Is that true? Prefect Chris Jones ran over and asked directly. Peter was speechless. The rumor was getting more and more outrageous. He shook his head and explained, Professor Green is not dead. Do you remember when we came back from the club and found him sneaking with a suitcase? He didn't hold the boggart as he said, but magical animals caught from the Forbidden Forest. He wanted to take these animals out and sell them abroad. I found them. So he's an animal dealer. Isn't he an Auror? Why would he do such a thing? Chris said in surprise. It's more than that. After being discovered by Peter, he actually used a life-suppressing spell on Peter to kill Peter. Alan interjected, his face full of anger and fear. What? How dare he do this? Chris's eyes widened and he asked in confusion, is he crazy? If he sells animals, he will only be imprisoned for a few years. But if he uses the unforgivable curse, then he's going to be in Azkaban for the rest of his life. Why would he do this? Because he's still a Death Eater. Peter's words were amazing, and he said thoughtfully, and it seems that the goblins know about it, so if the goblins threaten him not to pay back the money soon, they will expose the secret. So in order to pay back the money, Green set his sights on the magical animals in the Forbidden Forest. But I happened to find it, so for insurance, he decided to kill me. You also know that the goblins only recognize gold and not people. As long as you pay back the money, the goblins don't care if you are a Death Eater or not. No one will know that he is a Death Eater by then. Hearing the reputation of the Death Eaters, the two fell silent, but the shock in their eyes was hard to hide, and Chris couldn't calm down for a long time. I didn't expect that Professor Green, who is an Auror, is actually a Death Eater. This is too surprising. What the hell is going on here? Things are very complicated. In short, the Ministry of Magic will hold a public trial in a few days, and then I will go as a witness, and then the result will be determined. Peter shook his head without further explanation. The next day, as Alan had said, word spread throughout the school. Peter York had discovered the identity of Professor Green's dark wizard and had defeated him. In the end, it was passed around and turned into various versions. Most of them are in positive form, defeating the dark wizard Green. But another part has become a grudge between Peter and Green. What's more, it was said that Peter was the dark wizard, killed poor Professor Green, and framed the identity of Green's dark wizard. Especially the last rumor. There are still some students. In particular, Gryffindor accounts for the majority of the number, and the others are actually Slytherin in second place. When Gossip Alan excitedly told Peter these versions of the rumors, Peter couldn't help crying and laughing for a moment. He asked Alan, Gryffindor and we don't deal with it. I can understand that I believe this last rumor. But the question is, why are there more people in Slytherin who believe I am a dark wizard than Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff? Trust me, in Slytherin's cognition, dark wizard is a compliment word. This is the praise of your classmates in the academy. Alan said with a smile. Thank you, I still have no luck. Peter rolled his eyes at him and rejected this so-called compliment. The matter between Peter and Professor Green spread widely, but no professor came out to refute the rumors, so the more and more the rumors became more and more outrageous. During lunchtime, Peter came to the auditorium to eat, and saw the long table of Gryffindor. The Weasley twins were exaggerating the story, and it was still about Peter and Professor Green. Peter listened to it for a while, and was speechless for a moment. The two guys sang together as if they had seen it. They described the confrontation between Peter and Professor Green in a perilous situation, with an exaggerated expression, which attracted the audience. Especially since many of knew they had a good time with Peter, so they felt their version was more authentic. But in fact, the stories of these two guys are basically nonsense except the protagonist's name is true. But Peter didn't bother to expose these two guys, just treated them as entertainment students. After all, there are too few entertainment items at Hogwarts. Except for a Quidditch, there are basically no other entertainment items. In the afternoon, a group of Ministry of Magic personnel came to the castle, and was personally received by Professor McGonagall. A group of people went directly to Peter, headed by a tall, ruddy middle-aged wizard with a short brown beard. The middle-aged wizard extended his hand friendly and introduced himself. You are Peter York, right? I'm Amos Diggory from the Department of Magical Creatures Management and Control of the Ministry of Magic, who is in charge of collecting evidence of animal trafficking in Bloodline. Hello, Mr. Diggory. Peter reached out and shook hands with him, then looked at a few uniformed staff behind him, and said, Are you here to find me, to take you to the scene? Yes, Mr. York, we are running out of time, so we need to trouble you, said Amos Diggory politely. Watching the student in the same grade as his son, especially after hearing that it was the kid who caught Green and brought him back to the castle. He, who always thought that his son was the best in the world, also gave birth to a feeling that he was both born and born. Okay, the minister has already told me last night, then I will take you there now. Peter got up and prepared to take them to the Forbidden Forest. Dad, why are you here? Cedric hurried over, gasping for surprise. Amos Diggory looked at his son, and patted Cedric on the shoulder happily. I have grown taller and stronger. I have work to do in the department today, so I can't talk to you anymore. I remember it at night. Write to us. Then he turned to Peter and said, Come on, Mr. York, we've got our broomsticks and we'll be there as fast as we can. Dad, what are you doing with Peter? Cedric said in surprise when he saw Peter in the crowd. Cedric, you know Peter York? Asked Mr. Diggory in surprise. After all, one of them is Hufflepuff and the other is Slytherin, so it stands to reason that there will be no intersection except for class time. In his impression, the people of Slytherin are all tugging and ignore the people of other academies. Mr. Diggory, Cedric and I are good friends. We've known each other since we were in Diagon Alley, Peter said with a smile. Ah, that's really good. Good people always get along with good people. My son Cedric has learned several spells before he started school, Mr. Diggory said happily, very proud of his son. Dad, stop talking. Cedric blushed, embarrassed to be boasted by his father in front of his friends. Especially in front of a friend who was more powerful than him, it made him want to drill into the ground even more. Of course, Cedric is really good, Peter said with a smile. After listening to Peter's words, Mr. Diggory became even more proud and boasted. Cedric once turned a snake that climbed under his feet into a stick when he was 5 years old. I'm sure there is no any a child can do this. Of course you are also excellent, Mr. York. Don't say it, Dad. Peter has already finished his first-year courses and joined Professor Flitwick's Charms Club, Cedric said in shame, interrupting his father quickly. Then again, he didn't have the face to stay with Peter anymore. Ah, Mr. Diggory of Yunner's behavior got stuck in an instant, which is really incomparable. He had to change the subject embarrassingly. Let's go to the scene, we have to collect evidence and bring it back. The group walked out of the castle. Cedric followed, embarrassedly said next to Peter, my dad is like this sometimes, don't mind. I think it's very good, you have a father who loves you very much, he always puts you on his lips, I'm very envious. Peter shrugged with a smile, showing that he didn't care. He has had a weak relationship in his 2 lives. He was an orphan in the last life. After the memory of this life is restored, he finds that his parents have also passed away. Fortunately, there is an aunt in this life who is very kind to him. Cedric was relieved to see that Peter really didn't mind, he didn't want to lose Peter as a friend. When they came to the edge of the Forbidden Forest, the group set up a broom and flew to the depths of the Forbidden Forest. When he came to the accident site again, Peter looked at a large piece of destroyed woodland below, still feeling a little shocking. It was said to be someone else. Amos Diggory asked tremblingly, Mr. York, is this where you fought Green? This is amazing. Peter shook his head and said, accurately, Green did it. After all, I'm just a freshman, and I can't confront him head-on, so I rely on the protection of trees and wait for an opportunity to beat him. Otherwise, he won't let it go, mine. That's very powerful. After all, you finally managed to defeat him and caught him. Diggory exclaimed, even if it was him, it would be hard to say that he could defeat an old Auror in the same situation. Who? The centaurs below noticed the movement and aimed their bows and arrows at the sky. Don't attack, it's me, Peter York. Peter shouted quickly. Several centaurs heard Peter's voice, put away their bows and arrows, and approached where Peter landed. Mr. York, is this? Amos Diggory looked at the centaurs and looked at Peter in confusion. These are my centaur friends. I asked them to help me see the scene yesterday, Peter introduced. Then he turned to look at the 3 centaurs guarding here, and said gratefully, Kareem, Orlando, Bernard, thank you for staying here all night. This is a bottle of Phoenix Tears, if you are fatally injured in the future if you do, you can drip it on the wound and save your life. Say hello to Bane for me when you get back. 5. When the 3 centaurs saw what Peter gave, they were a little stunned. They had seen the process of the pony being rescued by the tears of the phoenix. Kareem, the leader of them, took the small bottle cherishly, and said, then we will accept it with shame. We are very much looking forward to your visit to the centaur tribe. Watching the centaurs leave, Amos Diggory looked at Peter in amazement. The centaurs were very xenophobic. The Ministry of Magic once wanted to classify centaurs into the category of humanoid intelligent races, but the centaurs refused. They'd rather the Ministry of Magic classify them as livestock than wizards get involved in their lives. Today, the centaurs not only help him guard the grounds, but also welcome him to the centaur tribe. This is a treatment that other wizards do not have. Peter brought a few people from the Ministry of Magic to the iron cages where the magical animals were imprisoned. The magical animals here finally recovered a little after the care of the centaurs for a night. When they saw the arrival of humans, they issued vigilance roar. Peter asked Diggory, backquote, what are you going to do with these animals? Are you going to let them go now, or take them back? It's not necessary to bring them back. After all, these animals are creatures in the Forbidden Forest. We have discussed with Dumbledore, we will hand over these injured animals to your professor of the protection of magical creatures to take care of them, and they will be taken care of when they are healed. Just put it back in the Forbidden Forest, said Amos Diggory. Afterwards, a group of staff took pictures of these animals, and released the uninjured magical animals directly. As for the other injured animals, after applying magic, they were hung on broomsticks and brought back to the edge of the Forbidden Forest to Professor Kettleburn. Take care of. Afterwards, Amos Diggory went directly to the middle position and read out, "Trails appear," and saw a cloud of golden gas released from his wand, and then filled Hao Jiao in the center of the entire field. Then Green's figure appeared. Peter looked at this scene in surprise. It was a reproduction of the scene from last night, but he was a little relieved that the magic only showed the trace of Professor Green, and Peter did not appear. Look at Peter's surprised look. Amos Diggory said proudly, "This magic can reveal what Green did last night. This is also one of the strong evidence against him." Peter said in surprise, "If this magic is so useful, why don't many criminals use this magic to reproduce where they have been in the trial? Then they are directly convicted." Amos Diggory said regretfully, "But this spell also has an anti-curse of disappear. Many experienced wizards will use this spell to erase their traces at the first time. In this case, the trace revelation spell is useless. Last night was because Green had not had time to use the spell, so we took this opportunity." Peter silently memorized the names of these two spells, and he will also pay attention to this aspect in the future, otherwise his actions will be revealed by others, and his secrets will be exposed. After collecting evidence, the group rode on broomsticks again and flew out of the Forbidden Forest with the injured magical animals. For the next few days, Peter still went to class, the library, and the dormitory every day between 3 o'clock. Except that his fame suddenly increased, and he was pointed wherever he went, nothing changed. On Thursday afternoon, Defense Against the Dark Arts class, Peter followed everyone to the classroom. Defense Against the Dark Arts is a big class, with people from 4 academies taking it together. So Peter is Ellen and Hufflepuff's Cedric on the left, and the Weasley twins on the right. 5 people huddled together, and the stark look of the surrounding colleges is out of tune. "Peter, you lost our Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, who is going to help us in class now." "No one will come," George said expectantly. "Why did I lose it? Our school's Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher changes every year, and this time it was just Professor Green who did something bad and got caught. Why is it on me?" Peter retorted. He had to firmly resist this kind of thinking makes him look like a Defense Against the Dark Arts professor killer. But according to the usual cases in previous years, it should be Professor Snape to teach us. After all, I heard that Professor Snape has been applying to Dumbledore for this position. Peter said with a smile. "What, Professor Snape? Merlin, kill us." The twins instantly collapsed when they heard that Professor Snape was teaching Defense Against the Dark Arts. "We don't even want to take his potions class, and now we have to use Defense Against the Dark Arts." Peter looked at their expressions amusingly. These two guys weren't even afraid of Professor McGonagall in school, but they were as good as kittens in potions class, but they were still detained by Professor Snape, who was disliked by them. Score, with a look of anger and dare not speak, can only call him Old Bat secretly behind his back. As the class bell rang, everyone sat obediently in their seats, waiting for the arrival of the substitute teacher. The classroom door opened. Peter looked back. His face was full of surprise. It was not Professor Snape as Peter thought, but Dumbledore. "Headmaster Dumbledore, why are you here?" Peter asked in surprise. "Oh, since our original Professor Green has only been teaching Defense Against the Dark Arts for 2 months, and there are no other professors to replace the class for the time being, so I have to play." Dumbledore wore a AC/DC white robe, the long beard was tied with a colorful rope with a bell, and he said with a smile, "Headmaster Dumbledore, do you mean that you will teach us the next course?" Peter asked in surprise. If that was the case, it would be the benefit of their current class of students. Dumbledore shook his head and said, "I'm just here to replace the get-out of class temporarily until I find a suitable professor. You have to be considerate of my old bones." There was a burst of disappointment in the classroom. Everyone knew that Dumbledore was the most powerful great wizard, and if he could become their defense against the dark arts professor, he would definitely be better than everyone. Seeing the disappointed expressions of the students, Dumbledore said happily, "I'm glad you look forward to my class so much, but I'll find the best professor for you in the future, not a bad old man like me." "Headmaster Dumbledore, you are the best professor," Fred said excitedly. "Oh, thank you Mr. Weasley for your compliment. But in teaching I still think that there are specialties in the arts, and there are many professors who are better than me," Dumbledore said, waving his wand, and all the textbooks in front of the students were closed. "We no need for textbooks today." Yeah, the students liked to hear this sentence the most, and they cheered happily one by one. Dumbledore looked at the students with a smile, then opened the classroom door and said, "We went to the vegetable garden today, and a group of goblins just moved in there, and now they are destroying our vegetable garden. Everyone's task today is to use the magic you have learned to find a way to drive these little guys away. Remember not to hurt their lives. Let's go." As soon as they heard the task, everyone left the classroom happily. Muggle students had never seen a goblin, and wizards born in the wizarding world wanted to play, and they were very interested in the content of this class. "Peter," Dumbledore stopped Peter and said, "Come with me to the Ministry of Magic after class later." "Is Green's case on trial?" Peter asked speculatively. Dumbledore nodded, looked at Peter and said, "This incident is the biggest case in recent years, and it also involves the Death Eaters and the Longbottoms, so when you ask questions later, if someone deliberately makes things difficult, just ignore it, you're just going to be a witness." "You know what? Isn't this evidence found? Does anyone still want to excuse him?" Peter asked in surprise. Although Peter was only 11 years old, Dumbledore didn't see him as a child, so he explained directly, "Some people in the Ministry of Magic think that Aurors are Death Eaters. If they spread it out, it will affect the reputation of the Ministry of Magic. So, they thought it was better to keep it under wraps and keep only the crime of animal trafficking." "Only keep the crime of animal trafficking? Oh, doesn't that mean that you can come out after only a few years of detention?" Peter sneered, "This kind of magic is really corrupt enough. Even if I was almost killed by the death curse. Don't they think about the battle heroes Longbottom and his wife? You know they are still lying in St. Mungo's hospital. Green is responsible for this." Peter thinks that after Voldemort has mastered the Ministry of Magic, he can justifiably destroy the existing Ministry of Magic system, and directly sweep these backward and rotten things into the dust of history. Dumbledore looked at Peter's angry look, smiled and comforted, "Actually, you don't need to be too angry, it's just their wishful thinking." Minister Millicent Barnold, and Director of the Legal Division, Amelia Burns, are firmly on our side. Also I have contacted Augusta Longbottom, who is Frank Cronbottom's mother, and she will also be in court, so our side is not weak and the evidence is good. I made you mentally prepared to let someone use the reason that you are still underage and deprive you of your witness status. And they have reason to doubt how you, a first-year student, escaped the pursuit of the old Auror and defeated him of. So, what should I do when the time comes to convince them that I really beat and caught Green?" Peter asked curiously. "Show them your strength directly, Peter. You must know that although there are many frameworks in the wizarding world, strength is always an important indicator." Dumbledore said seriously, "They may suspect you because of your age, but you won't doubt your strength." "Professor Dumbledore, this really doesn't look like something you would say." Peter looked at Dumbledore in amazement. In his impression, at least on the surface, the White Wizard should be the kind of good guy who would say, "This is love, Harry," to Harry Potter, instead of telling him to speak with his fists like he does now. It's so weird. Seeing Peter's incredible look, Dumbledore smiled and said, "Adults always treat children with contempt, so only if you show enough strength, they will be willing to believe. Of course I'm not suggesting that you go to the Ministry of Magic. It's just that you can be bolder when someone questions you." Dumbledore patted Peter on the shoulder and strode out of the classroom. This defense against the dark arts class has completely turned into a game for the students. The students are jokingly chasing the goblins and using various methods to drive them away. Goblins are one of the most common harmful garden animals in Northern Europe and North America. It was up to a foot tall, had a large head out of proportion to its body, and sturdy feet with protruding bones. They live in goblin burrows underground, where they dig up the roots of plants and usually make a mess. When goblins are nearby, they are also conclusive evidence that a house belongs to a wizard. Goblins are pretty dumb, so when they realize they're doing a goblin eradication, they rush out of their holes to see what's going on, making them very easy to catch. When Dumbledore announced the start of the game, everyone started to move, and the Weasley twins had the best results. They were near the goblin infestation, making a movement to attract the goblins, then grab their feet and stun them with a few quick turns. Throw it directly out of the vegetable field, the fence. The two Mr. Weasleys did a great job, 10 points for Gryffindor. Dumbledore praised. That's awesome, George Fred. Peter said, giving the twins a thumbs up after knocking a goblin away with a knockback spell. Well, if you were constantly punished by your mother to deal with goblins in the garden, you would be so skilled. The twins said with a bitter face. Peter was bored and grabbed a goblin to play. The little goblin was not afraid of people at all. He kept punching and kicking him in his hands, and shouted, "Let me go." A defense against the dark arts class ended in play, and the students happily left the vegetable garden and returned to the castle. Peter completely gave up on this class, even Dumbledore was paddling like that. No wonder the defense against the dark arts teacher, either the animal trafficker or the stammering Quirrell, or the liar Lockhart, the werewolf Lupin, the Death Eater Crouch, none of them are ordinary people. After class, Peter said goodbye to his companions and followed Dumbledore to the grass outside the castle. "Grab my arm, Peter," Dumbledore said, "we're going to the Ministry of Magic. Can't you use your fireplace to go to the Ministry of Magic?" Peter said with a look of resistance. To be honest, he didn't want to use apparition. "I heard that this thing is like stuffing people into the sewer, which is very uncomfortable." "Or did you summon your phoenix to send us a section?" "The phoenix teleportation is very safe and comfortable. The fireplace is an emergency access channel, and it's out of service." Dumbledore smiled and shook his head, "And Fox has been mad at me these days and has gone on strike." "Okay, hurry up, the trial will be held at 6 o'clock in the afternoon, it's 5:30. We have to get there, we can't be late." Well, Peter reluctantly grabbed Dumbledore's arm, and the two of them disappeared with a snap. After a dizzying turn, the two appeared in central London. "Follow me," Dumbledore said to Peter, ignoring the strange glances around him. Peter looked at the clothes of ordinary people around him, only to realize that he was wearing a Hogwarts wizard robe uniform. However, given that it was only Halloween a few days ago, and Peter's appearance at the age of 11, the people around him only thought he was a child of a wizard lover, and gave him a kind smile. As they walked forward, the buildings on both sides of the street gradually became less majestic than before. At last they came to a bleak side street with only a few shabby-looking offices, a tavern, and a dump truck that was about to overflow. Peter didn't expect the entrance to the Ministry of Magic to be in such a desolate place. Then the two came to a dilapidated red telephone booth and walked inside. Dumbledore pressed the phone button a few times, and a cold female voice came from the phone. "This is the Ministry of Magic, please state your name and what to do." "Albus Dumbledore and Peter York, come to the Inquisition," Dumbledore replied. The voice on the other end of the phone paused, and then an emotional female voice came out, "Welcome to the Ministry of Magic, Mr. Dumbledore." After speaking, 2 silver badges fell out of the metal slot for the coin return. The two put the badges on, and then the phone booth gradually sank into the ground. In the blink of an eye, the two were already in a gorgeous elevator. "Professor Dumbledore, which floor are we going to?" Peter asked curiously. "We were going to go to the main hall on the 8th floor for a wand check first, but now we're in a hurry, so we're going straight to the Wizengamore courtroom," Dumbledore said with a smile. "As a celebrity, there's always a little privilege." The elevator stopped quickly to the 10th floor, and Dumbledore took Peter down the elevator to the lobby, then turned the corner to the gleaming black wooden door. At the door stood an elderly woman, wearing a hat with a stuffed vulture on her head, wearing a long skirt, and looking serious. As soon as she saw Dumbledore, she walked over quickly in surprise and said, "Albus, I thought you weren't coming." "Augusta, you have to think about a person who is over 100 years old, and you always have to move slowly," Dumbledore said with a smile, "and I just replaced the class today, giving students a defense against the dark arts class, so you can only come here after class." "Class, Albus, you haven't taught for more than 50 years. I didn't expect this class of students to be so lucky to be able to take your class." Augusta Longbottom said in surprise, and then expressed regret. My grandson Neville has 2 more years to enroll, I'm afraid he can't wait for your class. Dumbledore is just mud and goblins who got us through a lesson. Peter couldn't help but interject, what a pity for Dumbledore's class, who was used to paddling. Albus, who is this? Old Lady Longbottom looked at the little boy behind Dumbledore in surprise. His name is Peter York, the man who exposed and caught Green, and this time came as a witness to prove Green's crime. Dumbledore introduced, pulling Peter forward. Of course, he was also one of the victims. Green cast a life-sucking spell on him, and he escaped. The old Lady Longbottom looked surprised, full of incredible expressions, and then looked at the Slytherin decoration on him, and couldn't help asking, which family's child is this? Is it really only 11 years old? It's really amazing. Ma'am, I'm Muggle-born, not a pure-blood wizard, Peter explained. This time, the old Lady Longbottom was even more shocked, and then said with some regret, if only my grandson had half of your talent. He has not shown any talent as a wizard yet, I am really afraid that he is a squib. Quote, Ma'am, I believe that your grandson must be a wizard, and as long as it is recorded in the Hogwarts Book of Admission and Pen of Acceptance, it will not be a squib. You can ask Dumbledore for this. He is Hogwarts after all. Principal of Oz, Peter said with a smile. Of course he knew that Neville Longbottom was not a squib. After all, he would be the snake-killing hero who cut off Voldemort's Horcrux Nagini in the future. He also took over the position of Professor of Herbal Medicine. Thank you, boy, I hope so. Mrs. Longbottom thought Peter was just comforting her. Augusta, if you're really worried about 037, how about I let Minerva read the Book of Access when I go back, so that you can feel at ease? Dumbledore said. He generally ignored this, but looked at Long with a heavy heart. Mrs. Patton expressed her own suggestion. Old Lady Longbottom's eyes flashed when she heard it, but she shook her head immediately. It's not necessary, Albus. Let's wait until he is 11 years old. If he receives an acceptance letter at that time, everyone will be happy. But if it is confiscated if he arrives, I will also find a good future for him and keep him away from here. 55. Then Mrs. Longbottom skipped this topic and said with a serious face, let's go first, but today I want to see the murderer who made my son and daughter-in-law lie in a hospital bed for the rest of his life. Will there be what punishment? Dumbledore nodded, pushed open the door, and the three entered the courtroom together. Inside is a larger stair room, which is full of people at this time, and it looks a bit lively. As soon as everyone saw Dumbledore coming in, they greeted him warmly. Wizengamore is the most important institution of the Ministry of Magic. It predates the establishment of the Ministry of Magic. It is now a combination of courts and parliaments. It consists of about 50 members, including the Minister of Magic and the Senior Deputy Minister of Magic, senior officials of the Ministry of Magic and other famous wizards. The highest officer is the Chief Wizard of Wizengamore, and Dumbledore is the long-term Chief Wizard of Wizengamore. It can be said that he is a high authority. The members of Wizengamore are all important wizards in the wizarding world, but when they meet Dumbledore, they take the initiative to say hello. Seeing Peter following behind Dumbledore, he curiously asked his identity. When they knew that he was the one who caught Green, they were all very surprised by his age, and they valued him even more. Oh, Albus, you rarely come here. It's really not easy to see you. An old woman who looked very old said to Dumbledore with a smile, and the words were aimed at the younger generation's name. This is Guthilda March, who is in charge of the Wizarding Exam Authority. She will be in charge of your 5th grade OWL exams and your 7th grade NEWT exams. Dumbledore introduced Peter to the old woman, said, and greeted her happily, Gersta, your body is still as strong as ever. Mockingbird heard Dumbledore's introduction to her, looked at Peter with clear eyes, then smiled and waved his hand and said, this kid should only be in 1st and 2nd grade, maybe by the time he takes the OWL exam, I'll be buried in it. It's in the dirt. You are too modest, Gerstad. When I was in school, you were the one in charge of the exams. Now it's no problem to persist for 50 years. Dumbledore said with a smile. Peter listened to the conversation between the two and looked at the old woman in front of him in surprise. Dumbledore was in charge of exams when he was in school. How old must he be? People in the wizarding world really live a long life. Not to mention that there is Nicole May who lived by the Philosopher's Stone for more than 600 years. This Lady Marchbon, who is even older than Dumbledore, has presided over the Ministry of Magic exams for more than 100 years. Dumbledore has been over 100 years old. Many years old, still alive and well. It seems that it will not be a problem to live for decades. Hello, Miss Marchbanne. I'm Peter York, a first-year student at Hogwarts. You can call me Peter. Peter took the initiative to greet him, and he naturally had a sense of respect for this living fossil-like existence. What a handsome guy. I heard that you caught Green, right? He's so powerful at such a young age. I think he's much better than Dumbledore. Ms. Marchbanne looked at him and said with a smile. Her eyes were kind, and she looked like a character good. When Dumbledore was your age, he was just a mischievous child, but not as powerful as you are. Peter smiled cleverly and didn't speak. I'm afraid only this Ms. Marchbanne can say such a thing. Peter is indeed much better than me. Flitwick showed off to me that this kid beat the 7th graders head-on in the duel he organized. Dumbledore said with a smile, not minding Madge at all. Ms. Ban's words showed an expression of approval. Really, that's a genius. It looks like another genius has appeared, and I'll have to live a few more years to see what he can achieve in the future," said Ms. Marchbanne in surprise. She thought Peter it was luck to be able to catch Green, but according to Dumbledore, it wasn't what she had imagined. While chatting with Ms. Marchbanne, the time quickly came to 6 o'clock. With the whole body bound, Green was brought into the courtroom. The trial meeting officially began. The trial is conducted in the form of questions from the interrogators. The clerk is responsible for the record, and the final decision is made by a show of hands of all members. The moderator was Minister Millicent Barnold, and the interrogator was Legal Secretary Amelia Burns. Green was taken to the chair in the middle of the trial court, and his hands were bound by the shackles on the arm of the chair, his eyes full of fear and despair. Peter was brought to the accuser's seat and acted as a witness against Green's crimes. Because of this trial, the evidence is solid, so we will show the evidence to everyone first, then ask the question to the trial, and finally let everyone vote. Minister Millicent Barnold said to everyone, "What do you have doubt?" Most of the members shook their heads and said there was no problem. But one of the members raised his hand and said disapprovingly, "Ms. Minister, I don't think this is in line with the usual case of the trial. If we looked at the so-called evidence first, it would affect everyone's subjective judgment. This is not in line with fair act by the Ministry of Magic." Cobain Yaxley, what advice do you have? Minister Millicent asked with a frown. Unexpectedly, someone jumped out to object in the first session. Yaxley adjusted his tie and said, "It's still the old practice, and I'm now taking issue with the current trial. Why put a child in the accuser's seat? I don't think the words of an immature child can be used as valid evidence in court." He pointed the finger at Peter. The members of Wizengamore, after hearing his words, began to talk a lot. When they looked at Peter, some people looked at him with disapproval. After all, in the eyes of these members whose average age was over 50 indeed, it cannot be used as a strong basis for judgment. Peter was sitting in a separate seat at the moment. The closest to him was the old lady Longbottom. He looked at the wizard dressed as an elite man who jumped out. He aimed the most at himself, and frowned at the old lady Longbottom. The man asked softly, "Mrs. Longbottom, do you know this man? Sounds like he's with Green." The old lady Longbottom looked at the wizard in the observation group seat with disgust and said, "This Cobain Yaxley is a Death Eater. Of course he has to defend his own people." "What? He's a Death Eater?" Peter was very surprised, and he asked in confusion, "If he's a Death Eater, why can he sit on the Wizengamot seat instead of being locked up in the Azkaban?" The old lady Longbottom said bitterly, "This is a very cunning guy. He joined the Ministry of Magic before the Dark Lord fell. He walked in the Ministry of Magic by means of both sides. Wait until the Dark Lord falls. This guy has nothing to do, but climbed higher and higher, and successfully entered Wizengamo. Yaxley, even if doesn't say the kid's witness is secure, he's also the one who caught Green. He has a right to sit here," Minister Millicent said. When the Wizengamore members heard the news, they all looked at the little boy on the witness stand in surprise. They never knew it was the kid who caught Green. Harry Potter, who could defeat the Dark Lord at a year old, can hold him down. "Ms. Minister, you say that an 11-year-old child, especially a young wizard from the Muggle world, can defeat an experienced old Auror. This is too far-fetched." Yaxley looked disbelieving. "Then how do you want to believe?" Minister Millicent asked, frowning. Since the kid said he was the one who caught Green, then we need to verify his words to see if he can really have such strength. Yaxley said confidently. After all, sometimes a child is for the sake of reputation. It's not impossible to tell some lies. Do you still want them to duel again? This is ridiculous, Yaxley, said the minister with a disapproving face. Of course not, minister, Yaxley said with a high-sounding voice, his eyes flashing from time to time. He said to the members, we are here to find out whether Saraglin really sells the magical animals in the Forbidden Forest and whether he Death Eater status. But all current sources of evidence point to an 11-year-old child. This seems absurd. We need him to show the strength to allow us to admit that he is true. Yaxley, as I have said, we have prepared enough evidence, including the questions we asked with Veritaserum when we were at Hogwarts. Green has confessed his guilt, said patiently. My God, Minister, we will only use Veritaserum to inquire when we have enough evidence. Could it be that after listening to a child's words, you use the Veritaserum in a hurry? Yaxley said with an exaggerated expression, and as we all know, our Aurors are trained with Veritaserum. If not for persecution, I can't see why Green would plead guilty. Yaxley, are you saying I'm abusing my power? Minister Millicent Barnold said with a serious expression, obviously indignant. As one of the most powerful ministers at the Ministry of Magic, she has completely broken with the pureblood family of Death Eaters since she imprisoned many Death Eaters in Azkaban. If it weren't for her prestige in the magic world and the support of many lower-level wizards, I'm afraid the pure-blooded families would have let her down. Now Yaxley's remarks show that she wants to use this incident to damage her reputation, so as to prevent her from taking over as the next Minister of Magic. Yaxley, I was there at the time. And the Veritaserum that Green was taking at the time was a powerful Veritaserum made by Professor Snape, and even an Auror who had been trained in Veritaserum couldn't resist it. Legal Secretary Long Amelia Burns stood up and said, supporting Millicent Barnold. Peter looked at this situation and felt a little clear. Yaxley probably never thought about saving Green from the beginning to the end. Instead, he wanted to use this incident to attack the prestige of the female minister Millicent. And he is just a pawn used as a breakthrough. Looking at Yaxley's smug expression, Peter's mouth showed a smile. I am afraid many people think that they were just lucky to catch Green. I don't think I have the strength to fight an Auror. I didn't think so, Ms. Burns, Yaxley said, spreading his hands, then pointing at Peter. I just thought the minister was being deceived by this kid. That's why I rushed and used some inappropriate methods. As Yaxley pointed at Peter, everyone was staring at him from under their noses, some with scrupulous expressions on their faces, while others looked curious. Now, we need to ask the boy some questions first, to find out if his words are credible. Yaxley walked straight off his seat and went to Peter's seat, staring at him, trying to give him some pressure. Mr. York, how did you find out that Professor Green was selling Forbidden Forest creatures? Yaxley asked, holding a piece of parchment, staring at Peter. I wanted to go out for a breath at the Halloween banquet and found the mysterious Professor Green, so I followed him quietly in the depths of the Forbidden Forest, and found that he had a secret base next to him. Peter explained calmly, I just wanted to see what this guy wanted to do. Wait, you mean you followed a professor to the Forbidden Forest? Yaxley interrupted him directly and asked. Yes, but Hogwarts was ordering the students to be banned from the Forbidden Forest, right? Why would you go against the ban? Yes, that's because. Have you had a conflict with Professor Green before? Why did you risk your life to follow him to determine that he was an animal trafficker? There is no contradiction. I said I was watching him sneakily, so. In other words, you know that the school prohibits students from entering the Forbidden Forest, but you still did not obey the teacher's words, entered the Forbidden Forest, and followed a professor, right? Yes, Peter said, but that's because. Then you said Grim fired the death curse at you after he found you. So how did you make sure it was a death-killing spell and not some other spell? Have you ever been exposed to this type of magic before? I mean black magic. Yaxley interrupted Peter at a rapid pace. After being interrupted one after another, Peter was directly annoyed, took out his wand and put it on his neck, casting a silent, sound loud, spell. Then he cranked up the volume and said, "Can you please let me finish?" The loud sound directly shook the ceiling around the interrogation room, and dust fell. All the wizards covered their ears, afraid of being deafened. And I'm not a prisoner. You don't need to question like this. And who do you think you are? It's also the minister and the director who ask. Is it your turn? Cough cough. Someone accidentally inhaled dust and coughed continuously. The purple Wizengamot robe was full of dust. Especially Yaxley, who was closest to Peter, was directly shocked by the deafening voice, and his eyes filled with stars. I couldn't recover for a long time. Dumbledore, who had been watching from a distance, sat in the observation seat and looked at this scene amusingly. Only he and Mrs. Mockingbird beside him were spared by Dumbledore's magic. You are in contempt of court. Yaxley turned to Millicent Barnold and said, Minister, I propose to remove his accuser status. He is obviously guilty. Oh, this kid used a silent charm just now. He used a silent voice loud charm. Ms. Marchbon exclaimed in surprise. Yes, I saw it too. He's only 11 years old, so he mastered silent spellcasting at such a young age. What a talent, a jury member exclaimed, looking at Peter with curiosity. In this case, it is really possible for this child to use this magic to defeat Green by surprise, and it is not impossible. A member of Wizengamo said swearingly, apparently forgetting that he also looked at Peter suspiciously just now. Yaxley in the audience saw that the members in the seat were leaning towards Peter, and quickly said with a louder voice, Everyone, don't forget that Green is an experienced old Auror. You can expect a first-year student to enter the school for only a few months. Child, to defeat an Auror. Wake up everyone. Cough. Dumbledore stood up, coughed lightly, and said, I can testify that Peter York does have the strength to beat Green's chances. Dumbledore's reputation is truly unparalleled. As soon as he stood up to speak, the other voices disappeared one after another, and they were all focused on his figure. He looked at the crowd and said, Peter York has excellent grades in all subjects in the school, and the professors of all subjects speak highly of him. Certified by Flitwick, a professor of charms, he was in the Charms Club and was in the Charms Club. In the duel competition, successfully defeated the 7th grade students head-on. And he also has a Phoenix companion. When capturing Green, this Phoenix was unfortunately hit by Green's death curse and experienced a nirvana. I think everyone should be aware of the powerful strength of a magical creature like the Phoenix. It's not a problem to hold Green with your feet up. Quote exclamation mark quote. Phoenix, really? This kid really has a Phoenix? Asked one of the jury members in astonishment. I mean, besides Dumbledore, has anyone else in the wizarding world managed to tame a Phoenix? The 1st grade beat the 7th grade students head-on. Merlin, this is so impressive. An old wizard with a red nose looked at Peter below excitedly. I'm sure he will have a great future in the future. Yes, such talent at such a young age. Because Field was still very young at this time, and his wings were not fully expanded, Peter took Field with him these days. After he heard Dumbledore's words, the bureau took Field out of his pocket, put it on the table in front of him, and showed it to everyone. Minister Millicent walked to Peter's side, pointed at the Phoenix, and said angrily, This Phoenix was hit by Green's death curse in order to protect its master. It has experienced a nirvana. This is another crime we test against Green, he to actually cast the unforgivable curse on a child in a frenzy. And the evidence is these 2 wands. Millicent Barnold took out 2 dark and shiny wands and directly used the flashback spell in public. In the dimly lit courtroom, both wands recreated the last few spells used, the most frightening of which was the evil green light that exuded death, unsettling everyone on the jury. Shaking his body, trying to stay away from this terrifying spell that is just a phantom. I think everyone should know what this means. Millicent Barnold took 2 wands and picked out the darker one. We've already contacted Ollivander for this one. He confirmed that this is the wand Green bought from him. The Ministry of Magic has banned the use of black magic, let alone the 3 unforgivable spells. Once found to be used, they will be locked in Azkaban immediately. Minister Millicent looked at everyone very seriously. On this one, Salo Green should be in Azkaban. And now there are people who are evasive, chasing a child and questioning whether it is possible to defeat an Auror. Minister Millicent looked deeply at Yaxley. If you all believe that a 1-year-old Harry Potter can defeat the Dark Lord, why can't you believe in an 11-year-old beat a grown-up wizard? Yaxley was a little embarrassed by the minister's eyes, and he said in an embarrassed voice, This is to ensure the fairness of the Ministry of Magic's trial. After all, no one wants to wrong a good person, right? But we held this trial on the premise of sufficient evidence. Minister Millicent looked at him oppressively. We have prepared for this for a few days and collected enough evidence. But for some people's reasons, these evidences are regarded as non-existent. Just because it is only a child who caught the culprit. Then why don't you wonder if Harry Potter defeated the Dark Lord? Or do you believe that the Dark Lord didn't disappear, but was huddled somewhere and waited for a comeback? Millicent asked Yaxley again. Ha ha, the minister's joke is not funny. Yaxley laughed dryly before replying. Peter on the side raised his eyebrows when he heard the minister's words. Could it be that the minister still has the blood of a prophet, and he had guessed it correctly? Voldemort is indeed still huddled in the Albanian forest. Yaxley returned to his position sullenly, with a gloomy expression on his face. Okay, does anyone still have any objection to this now? The director of the Legal Enforcement Department looked at the courtroom, which was quiet again, and asked again, if not, we will leave according to the original plan. Good job. This time everyone didn't speak, and looked down at Green, who had been ignored for a while, with a meticulous expression. Then we have a formal trial this time. The record hearing on Secretary Millicent Barnold said in a loud voice, will hear Salo Green's allegations of trafficking in Forbidden Forest fantastic beasts, the use of the unforgivable curse, and 3 counts of betraying Frank Kronbarton and Emily Longbottom 8 years ago, causing them to be tortured by Death Eater Lestrange with the Cruciatus. Peter York, accusing Saraglin of casting the unforgivable curse on him. Augusta Longbottom, accusing Saraglin of betraying his colleagues Longbottom and his wife, causing them to suffer inhumane torture and lose their minds. Plaintiff, Albus Dumbledore, accuses Salo Green of selling the Forbidden Forest magical beasts. The last sentence made the people at the scene into the discussion. They did not expect Dumbledore to participate. Go. Dumbledore stood up and said with a smile, the Forbidden Forest is the territory of Hogwarts after all. Green privately captures magical animals from the Forbidden Forest and sells them, which violates the interests of the school, so I, the principal, are the accusers of this crime. Quote. Then he walked across the room with a smile, came directly to Peter and Mrs. Longbottom, and sat on the plaintiff's seat under the surprised eyes of everyone. As if with Dumbledore, the reassurance, the trial process was completely different from before, and even Yaxley died completely. Minister Millicent Barnold, after listing several of Green's crimes, asked Wizengamore to use a potent veritaserum on Green, and more than 2/3 of them agreed. In spite of Green's eyes full of resistance and pleading for mercy, the minister directly fed him a drop of Snape's powerful veritaserum. Wait for the effect of the medicine to work, and directly ask him about his guilt again. It is obvious that Green, in a state of unconsciousness, directly stated what he had committed one by one. The jury members at the scene looked at the unconscious Green with indignation, and wished to throw him in the Azerbaijan now. Scaban feed the Dementors. After asking the last question, Minister Millicent finally let Green go. He looked at the members of the Wizengamore and announced loudly, the result is now very clear. According to the Ministry of Magic's law enforcement regulations, Green the crime of trafficking and smuggling magical animals was established. Azkaban was sentenced to be imprisoned for 10,370 years. Convicted of using unforgivable curse on student and attempting to kill Peter York. Sentenced to life in Azkaban. Betrayed the Ministry of Magic, sent messages to the Dark Lord, and betrayed colleagues Frank Clone and Emily Longbottom, causing them to suffer and lose their minds. Guilty convicted, sentenced to life in Azkaban. Several crimes are punished together, and Saraglin is sentenced to break his wand immediately, and the kiss of the Dementor is sentenced. Now to the Wizengamore jury for a show of hands, said Amelia Burns, director of the Legal Enforcement Division. If more than 2/3 of the people show their hands and agree, the crime will be convicted and the sentence will be executed immediately. Except for a few people including Yaxley who did not raise their hands, all the others raised their hands. More than 2/3 agree to enforce it. It is sentenced that Saraglin immediately destroys the wand. And 3 days later, the Dementor's kiss will be publicly performed. The director of the Legal Enforcement Department solemnly announced. At the end of the trial, the atmosphere in the courtroom relaxed a little, and the members of Wizengamore, who had not seen each other for a long time, greeted each other. A group of people gathered around Dumbledore, all complimenting him. Looking at Peter was secretly surprised. Apparently Dumbledore, although only the headmaster of Hogwarts, didn't seem to be as famous as the Minister of Magic. But in fact he is not only known as the greatest wizard, but also the chief wizard of Wizengamot, no less than the Minister of Magic. The old lady Longbottom, who had been standing beside Peter, looked at Peter staring at Dumbledore, thinking that he was envious of Dumbledore, and said comfortingly, "You will also have such achievements in the future. Don't worry." Seeing her misunderstanding, Peter said, "Thank you, Mrs. Longbottom." The two Aurors approached to undo Green's shackles and wanted to take him away. Peter looked at Green, who was still ineffective at this time, and noticed Yaxley, who had been black-faced all the time. He rolled his eyes and asked Green aloud, "Green, do you know the hidden identity of Cobain Yaxley?" Because Peter's words were suddenly loud again, everyone was startled, and there was no sound around. Immediately after, Green, who was unconscious, replied directly in the instantly quiet courtroom, "I know that Yaxley is one of the subordinates who trust the Dark Lord the most. Go back. I'm so envious that he was tagged by the Dark Lord. And I didn't." Green's unconscious answer under the Veritaserum made the suddenly quiet courtroom even quieter. Everyone looked at Green and the somewhat bewildered Yaxley in disbelief. Yaxley is a Death Eater. Everyone can't believe it. Then those closest to him moved away from him. At this time, Peter was also full of surprise. He originally just asked Green with a disgusting Yaxley idea AC/DC. But I didn't think Green really knew Yaxley's Death Eater status. Peter chased after the victory and asked, "Then do you know where his dark mark is?" Most Death Eaters put the dark mark on their arms, but it is easy to expose here. As Voldemort's spy, Yaxley should not be able to be in such an easily exposed position. "I know, I've heard others say that Yaxley carved the dark mark on the heart of his chest in order to show the Dark Lord's favor." Green replied again. This time, Yaxley, who originally wanted to argue, panicked and said with an innocent look, "He's lying, don't believe him." But the members of the Wizengamot around were not 3-year-olds. They knew the power of Veritaserum, so they had already clenched their wands and were on guard. Looking at these people who were far away from him, Yaxley knew that he was exposed, and suddenly turned into a black fog-like state. After quickly launching a few spells at the people around him, he quickly fled towards the door. Just when everyone thought that he was about to escape successfully, Yaxley's apparition disfigured into the black mist, slammed into a wall of light that suddenly rose, and fell to the ground to regain his human form. Everyone couldn't help but look back, only to realize that it was Dumbledore who made the magic and successfully prevented Yaxley from escaping. When everyone saw Dumbledore, they instantly had the backbone and quickly moved towards him. "Dumbledore." Yaxley got up from the ground in embarrassment, watching Dumbledore completely doomed to escape. He knew how terrifying Dumbledore, who could rival his master Voldemort, was. "Yaxley, it looks like you haven't escaped Voldemort's spell," Dumbledore said with a tone of disappointment. Dumbledore said Voldemort's name directly, which made the people around him tremble. His terror was already rooted in the memories of these people, and he was afraid that he would suddenly appear one day. "You don't have to be hypocritical, Dumbledore. My master will be back. That's when you will die," Yaxley said viciously. Then he saw the kid behind Dumbledore who exposed him, and he gritted his teeth instantly. "Peter York, you filthy mudblood, I was exposed by you. You better hope I don't come out, or I will let you taste the taste of life rather than death." "Hey, people who aren't even members of the Death Eater's periphery know your identity. I can only say that your secret mission is too bad," Peter said gloatingly, without looking worried at all. "I just thought I'm so sick of you, I didn't expect Green to actually know your identity. You guys are really troubled today." "Go ahead, Yaxley," Minister Millicent said in a complicated way. She did not expect that Yaxley was also a Death Eater. It has been more than 10 years since he came to the Ministry of Magic, and he has already climbed to Wizengamot. On the seat, "I didn't expect to be ruined in one day." A disarming charm immediately disarmed Yaxley's wand, then motioned for the two Aurors to shackle their hands. While waiting for the two Aurors to approach, Yaxley jumped up and grabbed one of the Aurors. At the same time, a wand popped out of his hand, put it on the Auror's head, and shouted loudly, "Don't move, especially Dumbledore, step aside if you don't want innocent people to die. And remove the magic barrier, if I can't get out. I'll let this Auror be buried with me." "Holy crap," Peter directly complained, "are all these Death Eaters wholesale wands? They all need a spare wand. How vigilant." Everyone, including Dumbledore, did not expect such a result. After all, Wizards rarely use wands other than destiny wands. I didn't expect to teach them a lesson today. You let this young man go, we'll let you go. Dumbledore promised. Even if he had the strongest Elder Wand in his hands, he couldn't save the young Auror who was ready to eat. He could only promise to let go. He goes. Dumbledore, do you think I'll take your word for it? Yaxley sneered, then shouted hysterically, remove all the protective spells. Especially the Ministry of Magic's ban on apparition, also remove me. Don't try to fool me. Me, I have been working here for more than 10 years, and I am very familiar with this place. If you don't do it, you will die together. Dumbledore sighed and waved his wand, and the wall of light at the door disappeared directly. Minister Millicent looked at the Auror held by Yaxley, frowned and told his staff, go and close the anti-apparition ban, and let others not have any obstacles. The subordinates persuaded nervously. Minister, we may find another way, or delay for a while, so that he cannot escape from the Ministry of Magic, otherwise the reputation of the Ministry of Magic will be damaged. Our first priority is the safety of our staff, not the reputation of the Ministry of Magic. No amount of reputation can be exchanged for the life of a wizard. Minister Millicent Barnold said solemnly. Little action. Yaxley has worked at the Ministry of Magic for more than 10 years, and is still a Death Eater spy. He is very familiar with this place, and if he finds it, the young Auror in his hands is in danger. With Dumbledore and the Ministry of Magic remove the magic, so that Yaxley can escape smoothly. Yaxley was still holding the Auror cautiously and slowly backed away, because he was most afraid of Dumbledore, the great magician. Seeing that Yaxley was about to run away, Peter, who was standing in the crowd, hesitated because he had just received a notification from the system that he had an optional mission, that is, if he caught him, the system would reward him with 30 points. You must know that he is only 15 points away now, and he will be able to collect 100 points in exchange for the opportunity of gene fusion again. After hesitating for a while, Peter gritted his teeth, and stared to death for the timid. I did this task today. He watched everyone around him staring at Yaxley, who was slowly retreating outside the interrogation room door, and quietly backed away. Then he hid directly in a corner where no one saw him, cast an illusion spell on himself, and quickly shrank his body until he became a little man the size of a little finger. He drilled through the crack of the door along the corner and ran to the outdoor hall. Soon he saw Yaxley, still cautiously holding the Auror hostage, and saw him retreating into the elevator. Yaxley could actually apparate away in the lobby, but he considered that Dumbledore was still here, so to be safe, he took the Auror into the elevator and prepared to wait for the elevator to leave this floor before apparating directly. Peter's extremely small body, coupled with the phantom body spell, rushed in when the elevator door was about to close, without being noticed at all. As soon as the elevator door was closed, Yaxley stunned the Auror with a stun spell. He was finally relieved and prepared to apparate and leave, and then flee England first. Go abroad to hide for a while, and wait for the Dark Lord to call again. Touching the dark mark in his heart, Yaxley firmly believes that his master is only injured now, and he will come back when he recovers his strength. After kicking the unconscious Auror under his feet, Yaxley pouted in disdain. If it wasn't for the pure blood sake, he would have ended him with a note of Arvada. He tidied up his clothes, then took out his wand, and was about to recite apparition when a series of "remove your weapons. All petrified, all petrified." Before he had time to react, several spells all hit him. The wand in his hand flew away, his whole body turned into petrification and froze, standing upright in the elevator. Peter rose back to his original form, then released the illusion, and appeared in the elevator. He looked at the petrified Yaxley in front of him and breathed a sigh of relief. Then he added a few spells without worry, and then a disappearing spell changed all the clothes on his body. After finding that there were no other wands and magic items, he directly after changing the rope and automatically tying it up, I finally breathed a sigh of relief. But looking at Yaxley, who was bound by him with only his underwear left, Peter instantly felt like a pervert, and quickly used polymorphism to turn the tied rope into a shroud, wrapping Yaxley firmly. Then press again, go down to the Wizengamot courtroom elevator on the 10th floor. Ding! The host has caught the Death Eater Yaxley perfectly, and the reward points are 30 points. The current points are 115 points. Does the host need to exchange the gene fusion immediately? The system directly prompted. Seeing that his points reached 100, Peter was so happy that he almost laughed. This time the points are too easy. Among his 100 points, in addition to 15 points obtained by reading in the library, the other 70 points were obtained from Green at one time. And now, because of Green's trial, 30 points have been triggered again. In just a few days, it is full again. He has to thank Professor Green. Outside the Wizengamore courtroom, everyone looked down at the closed elevator, guessing that Yaxley might have apparated away. Letting a Death Eater escape from the Ministry of Magic may have a great impact on the Ministry of Magic. Issue a wanted notice, go after Cobain Yaxley, and publish news through newspapers to alert the masses to this Death Eater. Minister Millicent Barnold calmly ordered. "Ah, where's that boy Peter York?" asked Mrs. Augusta Longbottom in a panic. "He was here just now, but he's gone now." When Dumbledore heard the old lady Longbottom's words, he was stunned for a moment, and quickly looked around, but he couldn't find any trace of Peter. He felt bad. Thanks for watching, please like and subscribe. Chapter 111. The successful escape of Death Eater Yaxley cast a shadow over the psychology of all members of Wizengamore. Suddenly, everyone in the hall found the elevator that had gone up and descended again. They couldn't help but wonder if Yaxley had not escaped yet. Attention! Minister Millicent Barnold raised his wand and pointed towards the elevator door with the other Aurors. Ding! The Wizengamore courtroom is here. An indifferent voice sounded in the elevator, and then the elevator door slowly opened. "Don't do it, I'm Peter York," Peter yelled out as soon as the elevator doors opened, seeing a large group of people pointing their wands at him. He wasn't like Dumbledore yet, and he could withstand so much. Human attack. Stop. Dumbledore hurriedly apparated to Peter, preventing the Aurors from attacking Peter. The Aurors live in the hands of Zero Sanchi, not the enemy. Minister Millicent saw that the person in the elevator was Peter York, and was surprised and quickly ordered his subordinates to stop. "Oh, Merlin's beard. It's Yaxley. Peter York has Yaxley," a member of the jury exclaimed, noticing Yaxley behind Peter, bound tightly by the shroud. "Wow." Everyone immediately looked into the elevator behind Peter and found that Yaxley, who had just escaped, was bound, and the Auror fell to the ground. Minister Millicent looked at this scene in surprise, stepped forward and asked Peter behind Dumbledore, "Mr. York, what the hell is going on? You were not with us just now, why did you appear in the elevator? And this Yaxley?" "Ms. Minister, I just saw that Yaxley was about to escape, so I quietly followed him with the illusory body charm and entered the elevator together. Maybe because of my small size, he didn't notice me, so I gave it from behind him. A petrification spell. Got him," Peter explained shyly. Everyone looked at him in shock. It was hard to imagine how a little boy could seize the opportunity and successfully capture a powerful Death Eater in a thrilling situation. "You are so daring," Minister Millicent said to Peter in admiration, and then said to his subordinates behind him, "Notify others, don't go to Yaxley anymore. Because he has been caught by our little hero Peter." "Peter York, what's the matter with your child?" The old lady Longbottom rushed up anxiously, looked at it carefully to confirm that there was no problem, and then said angrily, "How dare you deal with a person who is much stronger than you? Death Eater, if you are found, you will be dead." She had already had a good impression of Peter in this short period of time, but she didn't expect this child to be so bold and dare to run after the Death Eaters. "Mrs. Longbottom, don't worry, don't you think I'm fine?" Peter said obediently, letting her check. "Okay, Augusta, you don't have to worry too much about Peter," Dumbledore comforted mildly, then winked meaningfully at Peter and said with a smile, "I think Peter was prepared enough to would choose to do that. He's always got some amazing abilities after all, doesn't he? By the way, is Peter really a student of Slytherin?" Augusta Longbottom asked Dumbledore, looking at Dumbledore. "I'm afraid even Gryffindor's children don't have the courage to do so." "The Sorting Hat is your brain broken?" "I'm afraid I don't agree with you, Augusta," Dumbledore said with a smile, looking at Peter, who was praised by the stars at this time. "Courage is divided into many categories, but it is not only unique to Gryffindor. As for Peter, I'm pretty sure he's a real Slytherin, and what he does is always an afterthought, not a matter of spirit. So I'm very optimistic about his future. If it weren't for the fact that the child's birth and time were not the same, I would suspect that he was the child in the prophecy," Dumbledore said in an astonishing tone. "Dumbledore, you believe in that prophecy too much." Augusta Longbottom said with a look of disapproval. Her grandsons Neville and Harry Potter belonged to the children of prophecy, but Voldemort chose Harry Potter. But in this case, both families were ruined by this prophecy. So Augusta Longbottom resisted this prophecy from beginning to end. Oh, why don't I want to believe it? But fate always comes as expected, no matter how to escape. Dumbledore sighed, and then he looked at the figure in the distance with hope, but I always hope that there will be a little miracle, break the prison of fate. At this time, Peter was surrounded by Minister Millicent and the crowd, and asked him in detail what happened. Peter only hid the things that he would shrink, and told the rest. After listening to what happened, and adding the description of the Auror who had been awakened and held hostage, the matter has been understood very thoroughly. Minister Millicent Barnold affirmed and praised Peter's courage and responsibility. She patted Peter's shoulder kindly, and said, "In view of Peter, you have captured 2 Death Eaters before and after, and helped the Ministry of Magic to arrest if you have 2 traitors. I think I can apply for a Merlin Medal for you." Everyone, looking at the current situation, "I'm afraid we need to conduct another trial," Millicent Barnold announced loudly to the members of Wizengamo. So, everyone came to the courtroom again one after another, and started today's second trial. This time there was no one to blame again, so the trial went smoothly, and after taking a drop of potent veritaserum, Yaxley directly told everything he had done. In the end, after a show of hands, Yaxley was sentenced to life in prison for Azkaban. In fact, there are very few executions in the magical world. Even the most vicious Death Eaters are imprisoned in Azkaban. The previous screen was announced to execute the Dementor's kiss. The main reason besides the Dumbledore platform, there were many reasons that contributed to this situation. After the Yaxley trial, Minister Millicent directly proposed, in view of Peter York, outstanding contribution in both trials. I Minister for Magic Millicent Barnold, Director of Magical Law Enforcement Amy Leah Burns and Wizengamore Chief Sorcerer Albus Dumbledore, jointly proposed to Wizengamore that Peter York should be awarded the Order of Merlin 2nd Class. Now for a show of hands. Minister, is the 2nd level medal a bit too high? After all, he is just a child, is such an honor appropriate? A Wizengamore member questioned. I'm afraid I don't think so, Mr. Cornelius Fudge. According to the Merlin Medal grading standards, this kid has captured 2 Death Eaters before and after, and has made a great contribution, even a first-class medal. Millicent Barnold said, but after our consideration, we feel that the 2nd level medal is more secure. We are also looking forward to and encouraging him to make greater contributions in the future, so as to obtain a real first-level medal. Peter sat in a trance. In fact, he didn't expect much from the so-called Merlin Medal. As far as he knew, those who were favored by the Ministry of Magic seemed to be able to receive the Order of Merlin, especially those of the upper class, who received many more medals than one might expect. Arcturus Black was awarded an Order of Merlin 1st Class, which is believed to be due to the large amount of gold lent to the Ministry of Magic. It wasn't until he heard Minister Millicent call out the questioning person's name that Peter came to his senses and looked at Cornelius Fudge, the future Minister of Magic. The Wizengamore members. Cornelius Fudge was a stout little man with curly gray hair that was about to bald. He looked kind, but judging from his questioning tone just now, he was obviously not a good person to get along with. After listening to the minister's answer, Cornelius Fudge didn't say much, just smiled and sat back down, as if he was asking casually. In the end, after the votes of all members of Wizengamot, Peter won a Merlin Class 2 medal with more than 2/3 of the votes. The ceremony of awarding medal will be held in the near future. At this point, the meeting was all over, and many wizards came to shake hands with Peter and congratulate him on the Merlin Medal. Peter also thanked them one by one, and exchanged the contact information of owls with these people, so that they can contact each other in the future. Dumbledore watched silently and did not step forward to participate. After Peter and everyone had finished talking, he stepped forward with a smile. Peter, it looks like you had a good conversation with them. It's the first time I've seen a kid your age, and you're so good at talking to adults. This is nothing special to me, Professor Dumbledore. I am an Earl in the Muggle world, and I often need to communicate with other nobles, so this is just a basic skill. Peter said, of course, even compared, wizards of the wizarding world speak better than Muggles. Dumbledore nodded, then turned to say goodbye to Mrs. Longbottom. Augusta, it's very late now, I need to take Peter back to school, let's say goodbye first. Mrs. Longbottom, nice to meet you, goodbye. Peter told Dumbledore, following behind her. What a good boy. I haven't thanked you properly yet. You caught the murderer who hurt my son and daughter-in-law. If there is a chance in the future, I must come to the Longbottom family as a guest. Augusta Longbottom said with a smile. Peter said. After saying goodbye to the crowd, Peter followed Dumbledore away. This time they didn't apparate away, but returned to Hogwarts directly from the Ministry of Magic's fireplace through a temporary flyout. After a while, Peter appeared directly in the principal's office. Although this trip to the wall was not comfortable, it was at least much better than apparition. Little guy, why are you here? Did you come back from outside the school? The headmistress Darius DeWant asked curiously in the portrait on the wall. Long time no see, Headmaster Dumbledore. I went to the Ministry of Magic with Headmaster Dumbledore, and I'm back now, Peter replied. There was movement behind him, and Dumbledore returned. He smiled and said to Peter, you haven't eaten in the afternoon, do you need me to order some food for you here? No need, Professor Dumbledore. Peter waved his hand quickly. He didn't want to eat here, he was not at all comfortable. I can go to the back kitchen to find the elves and ask for some food to take back to the dormitory to eat. Well, take a good rest when you go back. You have experienced enough at the Ministry of Magic today, you need to keep your spirits up. Dumbledore nodded and said kindly. Okay, Headmaster, Peter said with a smile, then turned to leave, and he didn't remember until he opened the office door, turning his head to look at Dumbledore pleadingly. Headmaster, I caught Yaxley this afternoon, can I not? Tell Professor Snape. He warned me that if I did this again, he'd send me to Gryffindor. Seeing Peter's pleading expression, Dumbledore laughed and couldn't help asking, the problem is that in a few days the Ministry of Magic will award you the Merlin Medal, and the newspapers will report about you. Snape can't help but know. What should you do? Professor Snape may be out of breath at that time, Peter said in a lack of confidence. In fact, he didn't really believe that Snape would transfer him to Gryffindor. After all, there was no such precedent. He was afraid of being punished for copying the long, smelly Slytherin code. In the end, Dumbledore smiled and agreed to Peter's request, watching him hesitantly leave the office. Sounds like you've been through something extraordinary today at the Ministry of Magic, said one of the headmasters in the portrait on the wall. It's really unusual. Peter revealed the identity of a Wizengamot member as a Death Eater today and caught him. Directly added another prisoner to the courtroom. Dumbledore explained amusingly, and, with at the age of 11, he was awarded the Merlin Second-Class Medal, which can be said to be unprecedented. I'll just say that kid is extraordinary, otherwise Slytherin would never accept a wizard of pure Muggle blood. Headmaster Black in the portrait vowed. Come on, you have been despising his bloodline in front of you, saying that the Sorting Hat was wrongly assigned. Principal Darius DeWant, who was on the side, directly pierced his lie. After leaving the principal's office, Peter looked at the time. It was past 10 o'clock, and almost all the students had returned to their dormitories. He was not in a hurry. He walked slowly, especially in front of the responsive room on the 8th floor. He paused for a while, and then left directly. Not many people knew about Peter going to the Ministry of Magic. Even Alan thought he simply went to a trial, so he didn't care after asking a few questions. It wasn't until a few days later, when all the students finished their last class in the afternoon and came to the auditorium for dinner, they found that there was a small award podium in the auditorium, surrounded by ribbons. The students sat in their seats, looked at the arrangement on the stage curiously, and speculated that something major happened. It was not until the Minister of Magic appeared in the auditorium with a group of people that it attracted everyone's attention. Minister Millicent Barnold first greeted Dumbledore, and then, under his guidance, stood on the podium, using magic to slightly amplify his voice, and said, I'm Millicent Barnold, Minister of Magic, and I'm here on purpose today. An award ceremony is held here. Peter York, with his wisdom and courage, exposed and captured the dark wizard Salo Green, and the undercover Death Eater Yaxley hidden in the Ministry of Magic, made an indelible contribution to peace and justice in the wizarding world. Wizengamot votes to award the Order of Merlin, second class. Mr. York, please come up and accept the award. The minister shouted kindly to Peter at the Slytherin long table below. Under the surprised and envious eyes of Hogwarts teachers and students, Peter left his seat and came to the podium, where he was personally put on a gold medal with a purple ribbon by the minister. Dumbledore, who was beside him, clapped first with a smile on his face, and then everyone followed suit, all looking at the 11-year-old boy on the stage. Among them, Derek, the Weasley twins, and roommate Alan and other close classmates applauded the most with surprised expressions. Especially when the twins whistled directly and fired fireworks from their wands to celebrate. Peter, who received the medal, returned to his seat under everyone's attention, and listened to the minister's speech for dozens of minutes before finally eating. Merlin. Peter, you are the youngest recipient of the Merlin Medal in the history of magic. It's incredible. Alan sat next to Peter excitedly, staring at the gold medal on his chest with fiery eyes. There was also a circle of curious classmates around, and everyone looked at Peter and the Merlin medal with admiration. Seeing his roommate's expression of wanting to approach but not daring to approach, Peter took off the medal and stuffed it into Alan's hand. Said, "If you want to see it, just take it and see it, it's just a medal, and it's not a valuable thing. But it's very meaningful. This is the Merlin medal, and it's a second-class medal. How many wizards dream of getting it?" Alan held the gold medal carefully, as if it would shatter. Peter shook his head and went straight to eat. "York, can I have a chat with you?" A sweet voice came from behind Peter. A woman wearing a pair of jeweled glasses, curly wavy blonde hair, bared teeth, and a self-confessed smile, squeezed in from the students and asked Peter. "Are you a quote?" Peter asked suspiciously. "Oh, charming little guy. I'm Rita Skeeter, a professional reporter for the Daily Prophet." The woman opened her bloody red lips, said with interest, and stretched out her fat fingers, "Want to tease Peter?" Peter dodged her red nails, which were at least 2 inches long, and said politely, "Hello Ms. Skeeter, but I wasn't notified that I was speaking to a reporter." "Ha ha, the ministers are busy with their daily schedules, and these little things have not been notified in place." Rita Skeeter squeezed a girl across from Peter, and teased her chin that was completely out of line with the square curly hair, and then a piece of parchment and a quill flew out of her alligator leather handbag and wrote in midair. She stared directly at Peter and asked, "According to the description of the minister, you were going out from the banquet alone on Halloween night, and found the sneaky Professor Green, so you decided to follow him quietly to see to the end. What are you doing?" Peter glanced at the self-writing quill and saw on the parchment it read, "Peter York, a first-year Slytherin from the Muggle world," in what should have been a celebration of the cruelty around him. At the banquet, the desolate person left silently, hid in a dark corner and was sad alone, and then met the sneaky Green. His restless curiosity prompted him to pursue a teacher's secret. "Miss Skeeter, I've never experienced any cruel treatment in school, no sadness alone, and no restless curiosity. Is this pen of yours broken?" "What a mess," Peter asked calmly, but kept his eyes on the reporter in front of him. "Ha ha, it's just some artistic processing, don't care." Rita Skeeter waved her hand in a tone of indifference. "Let's start, but there are too many people here and it's noisy, why don't we talk in another place?" "Sorry, Miss Skeeter, I'm only an 11-year-old, and I'm not very good at answering other people's questions." Peter refused with a reserved smile. "Or you go to interview the minister or Dumbledore, they know what happened, will definitely be able to answer your question." Rita Skeeter choked directly. If she could interview them, would she need to come here to find a little brat? Especially Minister Millicent Barnold, who once commented on the articles she wrote in public, "There is no practical meaning except for entertainment," and she refused to accept her interview. And Dumbledore, the smiling tiger, in front of him, Rita Skeeter always felt that her mind was exposed and dared not wait any longer. But now it has hit a wall again with a child. When she heard the rejection, Rita Skeeter asked as if she couldn't believe it, "You refused? Do you know how many bookings the Daily Prophet has every day, and I a guest reporter for the Daily Prophet? Anyone I interview can be famous. Don't you want to be more famous and make everyone look up to you?" Hearing her bewitching tone, Peter rolled his eyes, thinking he was a child. He said impatiently, "I'm sorry, Miss Skeeter. This is the Slytherin's long table, and you have disturbed our meal." Rita Skeeter felt like she was going to be mad. First, the interview with the minister went wrong, and then Dumbledore refused her interview, and now a child dared to refuse her request. She stood up angrily, and the shorthand quill at hand followed her mind and quickly wrote something on the parchment. Peter didn't have to look to guess that she was writing about herself, and that it was malicious. So he directly said something inexplicable. Miss Skeeter, do you know a beetle? I've seen one, and it has the same pattern around its eyes as your glasses, and it's flying everywhere. Fly away. Have you seen it? The people around Peter couldn't understand the meaning of this sentence, and their faces were confused. But the reporter Rita Skeeter, who was just about to leave, changed her face greatly. She looked at him in an instant, and saw him look calm. She asked tentatively, "What do you mean? I don't understand." Miss Skeeter, did you know that our Transfiguration teacher, Professor McGonagall, was one of the 7 animagus registered in the 20th century? Peter answered the question. When Rita Skeeter heard this, she suddenly looked like a deflated ball and asked with an ugly face, "What do you want?" "What can I do, Miss Skeeter? I just don't want to be in the newspapers and see people talking nonsense to me," Peter said with a smile, looking completely harmless. "As you wish," Rita Skeeter said with a dark face, then turned around and left in a little embarrassment. "What kind of riddle are you playing with her? Why can't I understand it?" Alan said with a bewildered face. "No, I just told her not to interview me. You should have read the news she wrote, and the above is basically nonsense. So I declined his interview," Peter explained briefly. As for Rita Skeeter being an illegitimate animagus, there is no need to let him know. After sending off the Ministry of Magic, Dumbledore stood on the podium with a happy face and announced to the crowd, "Let's applaud again. Congratulations to Peter York on being awarded the Second Order of the Order of Merlin." The teachers and students applauded Peter, who politely stood up and bowed slightly to everyone. "In light of Peter York's accolades for Hogwarts, I'm announcing 300 points for Slytherin. For his bravery and wit." This time it was the Slytherin students who were excited. They were once deducted 500 points for fighting with Gryffindor, and until now they managed to get the score into a positive number, but it was only 10 points. They have all given up their plans to compete for the Academy Cup, but they did not expect that they would directly increase by 300 points and have reached the top position of the Academy. As long as there is no accident, they are the owners of the Academy Cup again. Slytherin's student gave up his previous restraint and threw out the wizard hat in his hand. The girls also tapped the plates and cups with their spoons excitedly. Some daring senior sisters ran over and hugged Peter's face and kissed hard, leaving a red lip print. In particular, a few excited Quidditch players wanted to do the wolf kiss to him just like the previous senior. Peter, who was so frightened, took out his wand and threatened them not to approach. "These people are all 1.8 meters tall," the rough guy above, with his pouting look, almost spit out what he just ate. Alan on the side laughed directly, with a gloating expression, and persuaded, "They are just thanking you, making up for their mistake of deducting points from their last fight. You can't despise them so much. How sad it is for them. What? Then how about you accept their gratitude for me?" Peter rolled his eyes and replied, "That's fine." Alan smiled embarrassingly, especially when he thought of being kissed on the face by a few strong men. His whole body got goosebumps. Then he said happily, "Our current Academy score is higher than the previous one. A full 100 points more for Ravenclaw. Now we can AC/DC win the House Cup and Quidditch Cup." "Don't be too happy, be careful not to be too happy. It's not even Christmas yet, and there is still a long time to come." Peter poured cold water. The next day, the Daily Prophet reported on Peter's achievement of the Merlin Second-Class Medal, and highlighted his age and the capture of the 2 Death Eaters, this time, with praise throughout, tone. And the reporter who wrote this is Rita Skeeter. "Why didn't this old woman make things up like she used to, and she praised you so much? Come on, what did you do with her yesterday? Let her please you so much?" Alan asked Peter pesteringly. "It's possible that she was fascinated by my handsome face. Maybe," Peter said with a smile, and poked at the moving picture of himself with the medal in the newspaper, only to see himself in the photo. A little dissatisfied he glanced at him, but he was very handsome. "I believe in you." Alan rolled his eyes at him and didn't ask any further. Peter is interested in moving pictures. Now that Christmas is approaching, he wants to take some moving pictures and take them back to his aunt to see. "I heard that the photo uses developer potion to make the people in it move. I don't know where this potion is sold." Peter looked at himself in the photo curiously, and was a little curious about its principle, but he still thought about it. "Give up, this kind of magic thing is completely unrealistic. Development potion. If you want to buy it, go directly to Owl and ask at the potions shop in Diagon Alley," Alan suggested. In the days that followed, Peter enjoyed the celebrity treatment. In the hallway after class, he often encountered people watching him, and when a girl passed by him with a blushing face, she shouted, "Hello, Peter." "Goodbye, Peter." Because Rita Skeeter's description of him in the Daily Prophet was too grand, and with the blessing of his handsome appearance, everyone who subscribed to the Daily Prophet was impressed by him, and some fans sent him an owl with an owl. Letters came, and many letters fell to Peter every day. However, Peter is still studying in the classroom, the library, and the dormitory as always. Although he has already reached 100 points in the system, the points are never too many. Speaking of points, Peter has been thinking about what kind of magical animal gene fusion to choose. It's just that there are a lot of magical animals in the Forbidden Forest, but Peter's abilities are temporarily disliked. He has fused the phoenix and bird snake genes, one makes him immortal, and the other makes him bigger and smaller. This third type, if he didn't come with similar abilities, he felt like he wasted his hard-earned points. But the magical creatures that he sees are hard to come by. For example, if he wants to integrate the ptarmigan gene, I am afraid he has to go to the deserts of North America to see if he can come across it. Invisible beasts are also very good at hiding, and they can predict the future, so it is difficult to catch. The only way I can think of at the moment is to find a chance to meet Uncle Newt Scamander, so as to get in touch with the invisible beast he raised. There are also civet cats that can clone themselves when attacked. They are pets of the French Ministry of Magic, and it is difficult for ordinary people to touch them. In the case of fire dragons, their genes are integrated, and the biggest possibility is that their physique will become stronger and their magic resistance performance will increase, but under Peter's undead skills, it is not very necessary at present. And relatively speaking, poison-horned beasts have higher magic resistance and can resist many spells and incantations, but if you want to touch them, the most likely place is Scamander. There is also the ability of Ball Escape Bird to transfer space at any time without much effort. While Peter's phoenix form can do it, he doesn't have this ability in human form. The apparition of wizards not only needs to read the spell, but also has the risk of splitting, and is restrained by the anti-apparition spell. It is also the most accessible to Scamander. So after a lot of deliberation, it is still the most cost-effective to find Uncle Scamander. Among them, Hagrid or Professor Kettleburn is needed as an intermediary to introduce. If it is not possible, Phoenix Field can be used. I think no magical animal lover will refuse Phoenix home. As soon as Peter came out of the library in the afternoon, he saw the twins running downstairs in a panic. He couldn't help but ask with amusement, "Did you encounter something terrible? Why do you look like hell? What's so scary about ghosts? Don't we see ghosts every day?" George slumped on the ground and said with a frightened expression, "We were exploring an old room on the 3rd floor and just opened a door. Broke the cabinet, and our mother ran out of it. She took the feather duster directly, chased after us, and said we were too naughty and wanted to separate me and Fred. Yes, although I don't know what the hell that is, but she looks so much like my mother, even the tone of swearing is exactly the same." Fred also said with lingering fears, "She looks like a mother, tell me to separate me from George and no prank. It's horrible." "That's Boggart, it can be the thing people fear the most," Peter explained, and then he couldn't help laughing when he heard what the two brothers feared the most. "I didn't expect you to be most afraid of Mrs. Weasley. If your mother knew, would she be angry and send you a shouting letter?" "Impossible. My mother would be very happy if she knew we were most afraid of her. After all, we are her most worrying son," the two brothers said in unison. "By the way, this Boggart is really amazing. After he became my mother, his appearance, demeanor, and tone were the same, and his swearing momentum was the same." George exclaimed, "Fortunately, we know that my mother is impossible to appear there." "Yes, so we just closed the door and ran out. Of course it's amazing. Boggart is something you only need to learn when you are in the 3rd grade of Defense Against the Dark Arts. It can see through people's hearts and become what people are most afraid of. What's more, the things that are changed have a part of the power of the original object. It can be said that it's amazing." Peter introduced, but he remembered the Dementor that Boggart transformed, and still has the ability of Dementors to absorb happy emotions. The Patronus charm used by Lupin to train Harry Potter. As soon as he said this, Peter was stunned for a moment, and then his eyes flashed with joy. He was worrying about where to find a suitable magical animal for gene fusion. Wouldn't it be delivered to his door? Although Bogut can be repelled with a single burlesque, his ability should not be underestimated. Although no wizard has ever known Bogut's true identity, many wizards have analyzed his abilities. In fact, Bogut has two abilities. It has always been the ability to read minds, which is similar to the wizard's Dementor. First, it will know what the other party is most afraid of through the ability to read minds. The second is the ability to change the ability to simulate everything. It will become the most feared thing for the opponent, thus scare the enemy away. This ever-changing and mind-reading Bogut is very powerful. He can turn into terrifying things such as basilisks, dragons, and dementors at will, and can simulate some of his abilities. It's just that Bogut has no wisdom, only simple instinct, so that the wizard can find a way to deal with him. The burlesque charm is the most effective way to get rid of Bogut. The spell makes Bogut the funniest thing you think. The more people the better the Bogut, because it doesn't know what to become. And the way to kill Bogut is to laugh loudly, and Bogut will explode into 1,000 wisps of smoke and disappear. Although Bogut has such a big weakness, it is really useful to Peter, and after fusion, these shortcomings may disappear. So Peter couldn't wait to let the twins take him to see it, and he decided to choose Bogut for the gene fusion this time. I really don't know why you want to see this thing. Do you want to see what you are most afraid of? The three of them came to the door of the abandoned house on the 3rd floor. George complained, he didn't want to be Borg anymore. The mother of the special became chased after him. Go in by yourself, Peter, we don't want to bump into that thing. We'll let you out. Fred followed. Peter couldn't help laughing when he saw how the two of them were dying. Obviously, these two guys have been beaten by Mrs. Weasley, who Bogut has become, and they have psychological shadows. He didn't force the two to go in, but after teaching them how to deal with Bogut, he opened the door and walked in, and then closed the door. In the old room, it looked like an abandoned classroom. Peter came directly to the wooden cabinet where Bogut was. He was curious about what he was most afraid of. The wooden cabinet door suddenly opened from the inside, and a clean and handsome adult walked out from it. He walked up to Peter with a smile on his face. The white clothes on his body suddenly began to seep blood, and then he said to him coldly, "This is not the case. Not true, it's just a fantasy before we die. There's no magic." Peter was stunned for a while, then looked at the person Bogut had become in front of him with a complicated expression. He was what he looked like in his previous life. He murmured, "It turns out that this is what I am most afraid of, and I am afraid that the world here is just a dream." Immediately, he laughed, directly reaching out and holding the hand of Bison in front of him. "System, after the integration of Bogut's genes, will Bogut's weakness be inherited by me? The host can rest assured that when this system performs gene fusion, the genes will be optimized, and there will be no weaknesses that you are worried about." The system replied. "That's good." Peter was relieved and said directly, "System, give me the genes of Bogut." Selected the magical creature Bogut gene. Gene fusion, the system prompted. At the same time, the Bogut in front of Peter exploded into a cloud of smoke and melted into Peter's body. At this moment, Peter's body suddenly gushed out a warm current, which flowed into his limbs and bones, and his whole body was warm, as if he was soaking in a hot spring. After a while, it will directly prompt, "Gene fusion is complete." There are only 15 points left in the system. After the gene fusion was completed, Peter looked at his body, and there was no other change in appearance. But at this moment, he realized for the first time that his brain, like a signal receiver, received the thoughts of two people outside the door. He clearly knew that the Weasley brothers outside the door did not speak, but he heard the thoughts of the two brothers in his mind. "It's been more than 10 minutes, why hasn't there been any movement inside? Could it be that Peter was stunned by the contents inside? Should I go in and take a look?" George's thoughts came to Peter's brain clearly. "There's no movement inside, should I take a look? What if something happens?" Fred's voice also sounded in Peter's head. "Have I turned into a Dementor?" Peter said in surprise. He is now in a state very much like a natural Dementor, just like Newt Scamander's sister-in-law Queenie Gold like Stein. You can sense what other people are thinking without chanting a spell. Having mind-reading skills has made Peter very satisfied. It's just that he wants his legilimency to be self-control, otherwise it would be a pain to hear what other people think all the time. So he tried to turn off this mind-reading ability in his mind. In the end, he didn't expect it to be successful. His brain was like opening the window of the house and closing the window again, and he couldn't hear the sound outside. He tried to read minds again, and succeeded in hearing the thoughts of the twin brothers outside the door. Peter is very happy to gain self-controlled mind-reading skills. In the future, as long as he is not someone who has practiced occlumency, he can easily do it when he wants to confirm other people's thoughts. After trying out the first mind-reading skill, he wanted to try Boggart's transformation skill, which was what he was most looking forward to. Boggart can turn into various things. He first tried to become another person. His mind suddenly flashed the image of his previous life, and then his body was numb for a short time. Peter looked at the glass of the window, and what was reflected on the glass was a handsome adult man with yellow skin and dark eyes. Peter unconsciously touched this long-lost face, but he was dazed. "Peter, are you okay?" "Well, who are you?" The door suddenly opened and the twin brothers rushed in. They waited outside for a while without moving, so they ran in worriedly, only to find that there was no sign of Peter, only an adult yellow man standing by the window. "Who are you? Where's Peter? What did you do to Peter?" The two brothers took out their wands and pointed them at him, asking sternly. Peter couldn't react, but he still smiled and said, "I'm Peter." "You lied. You're not Peter, you're Boggart, right?" Brother Weasley sternly retorted. "Zero Sanchi, what did you do to Peter?" "It's over, Fred, we killed Peter." George said with a mournful face, "We shouldn't have brought him here." "Did this Boggart eat Peter?" "What should we do with George?" Fred cried, "We killed Peter." The two brothers knew very little about Boggart and wondered if Boggart had become Peter's worst fear and ate it. "George, what should we do?" Fred looked at the Boggart, who turned into a human in front of the window with some fear. "He killed Peter, we want to avenge him." George mustered the courage to say hatred. "Yes, we're going to avenge him," Fred said, trying to overcome his fear. As they spoke, the two brothers took their wands and chanted the few spells they knew. Burning flames, big sticks in the front teeth, grind. Peter watched the reaction of the two 11-year-old twin brothers amused. A direct armor shield blocked their spell. George is wrong, magical creatures shouldn't be able to use wands. Isn't he Boggart, how can he still use spells? Fred was dumbfounded. "Yeah, he's not Boggart. He's human," George immediately responded. Peter stopped teasing them, and his body shrank for a while, and he changed from an adult yellow man in his 20s back to Peter York. "Now you should believe I'm Peter," he said to the stunned brothers with a smile. "Peter, did you drink the compound decoction? How did you become another adult?" Fred said in surprise. "Fred, you're mistaken, Peter, this isn't polyjuice. If I'm not mistaken, you're disguise magus." "Right, Peter," George said with certainty. Peter was a little surprised. "How did you know that?" "I once saw this in Bill's book, and it said that disguised magus are born, they can easily change their appearance, and become men, women and children, the most suitable for hiding their identity," George explained. Immediately, he looked at Peter in amazement, and said with some dissatisfaction, "You never told us that you were disguise magus. We thought you were eaten by Boggart. I only recently discovered that I have this ability, and I have never tried it before." Peter edited and said, "Isn't disguise magus born at birth? Can he still wake up halfway?" George asked questioningly. "I don't know. I should have had it before, but I never found it and tried it until I saw the shape of Boggart's transformation, and I didn't realize it." Peter said, "Nonsense. So you were trying to deform just now?" George believed what he said, and then he didn't know what to say, and said with a clear face, "You asked Boggart to learn from it. Just because it will become various things." 5. Peter laughs at his brain filling, but still nods, affirming his thoughts. Fred didn't care about this. He excitedly said to Peter, "You have already tried to transform just now, now let us transform into something else." "What do you want me to be?" Peter asked rhetorically. "Well, how about being Professor McGonagall?" Fred suggested. Peter didn't speak, but thought about what Professor McGonagall looked like, and then began to deform. After a while of numbness, Peter went straight from an 11-year-old boy to inflated like an inflatable ball, and then turned into Professor McGonagall without glasses. "Oh, awesome." The two brothers looked at this scene and said enviously, "If I had this talent, I could do a lot of things." "Mr. Weasley, you should study hard, instead of thinking about these unprofessional things." Peter learned to use Professor McGonagall's voice wickedly, and said to the two seriously. The two were so frightened by the sound that they shivered, and immediately realized that Peter was pretending to be, and couldn't help complaining, "Peter, don't scare people in this situation, it will scare people to death." Peter grinned and turned into Professor Snape again, looked at them indifferently and said, "Two smart Weasleys, I'm Professor Snape, not Professor Snape. Gryffindor deducts 10 points. Then he turned into Dumbledore again, looked at them kindly and said, "I believe that you, Mr. Weasley, will be the best Gryffindor students in the future." "That's so cool, Peter," the twins exclaimed when they saw Peter's continuous transformation. Then the brothers exchanged a heart-to-heart look and said with a smile, "Peter, we have an idea." In the old classroom on the 3rd floor, the Weasley triplets looked at each other and laughed. Among them, Fred said in high spirits, "Ha ha. When there were 2 people in the past, no one else could tell us apart. Now that we have 3 people, we are invincible. Peter, why don't you just join our triplets club? That's what we'll do with that old Felch guy. And when you get home for Christmas, remember to be like us and see you my mom, be sure to scare her. Hee hee. Come on, I don't want to accompany you in trouble. Maybe it's me who is to blame." Peter gave them a blank look, changed back to himself, and then urged, "Remember to keep it a secret for me, I don't want to make too much of it. People know I have this ability." The twins patted their chests for assurance, and the 3 left the old classroom. After separating from the 2, Peter returned to the dormitory alone, and his mood was still not calm at this time. Today, he accidentally chose Boggart's gene fusion, and the harvest exceeded his expectations. Not only does he have the mind-reading technique that he can control independently, but he also has another perverted human metamorphosis skill. He just showed off his human transforming skills in front of the Weasley brothers. But Boggart's deformation is ever-changing, but is not limited to appearance deformation. At this time, there was no one in the dormitory. Peter looked at the snake-shaped relief on the wall and directly activated his transformation skills. In the blink of an eye, a large white snake over 6 meters long appeared on the bed. One more change, the white snake becomes an owl. Another change, it becomes a ball. In a short period of time, Peter was constantly changing from human form to living thing to dead thing, unconstrained and changed at will. Peter, getting more and more excited, his current human body transformation skills are directly full, which is many times higher than that of Animagus, who is known as the masterpiece of transformation. Of course, Peter didn't underestimate the transfiguration course because of this opportunity. After all, his transformation only acts on himself, as a camouflage life-saving skill, and the actual attack power has not increased. And true masters of transfiguration, like Dumbledore, are very skilled in transfiguration, and their combat power is very fierce, not just for self-transformation. It's December, and Peter has been a figure in school during this period of time. After all, the 2 wizards he had captured before have achieved results. Not long ago, the Daily Prophet published that the Dark Wizard Green was officially held a Dementor's kiss, and now it is just an empty shell without a soul. When the news that the same senior official of the Ministry of Magic, Cobain Yaxley, was a member of the Death Eaters, was announced, it caused an uproar in the magical world. Even with Yaxley arrested and thrown into the Azkaban, the Ministry of Magic's reputation had not been restored. Due to the pressure from all parties, the female minister Millicent Barnold, who is known for her tough style, will officially step down at the end of December and will no longer hold the post of Minister of Magic. Afterwards, more than a dozen campaign personnel participated in the competition for the position of Minister of Magic, including the more famous Barty Crouch, and Cornelius Fudge, whose advantage was not too great. Peter felt sorry for Millicent Barnold when he saw the news in the paper. The position of the Minister of the Magic World does not have a specific term like the Muggle world. Generally, if there is no mistake, it can serve for a long time. And Millicent Barnold has not served as Minister of Magic for 10 years, and he is not too old, but he can only step down under pressure from all parties. Peter, which of these people do you think will be able to successfully run for the ministerial position? Alan asked casually after seeing Peter's campaign information in the Daily Prophet, and then said with oath, "I'd say it must be Batik. Roch has the biggest advantage, he's tough, and a lot of people like his style of doing things. I don't think it can be him. If he had succeeded in the election, he would have already succeeded." Flora on the side said disapprovingly. He was the head of the law enforcement department, but since he sent his son to Aziz after Kaban, the public no longer trusted him, and he was transferred to the Department of International Magical Cooperation, so the possibility of his election success is very small. Maybe it's Cornelius Fudge, Peter interjected, jokingly, but he actually knew that, if nothing else, the next Minister of Magic would be this Fudge. Impossible, Fugatar's reputation is not as great as others, and he has no political achievements. It's too mediocre. Alan shook his head and said, feeling that Peter was guessing. The magic world now needs mediocrity like him, Peter said meaningfully. Then he saw that there was a betting section in the Daily Prophet, which made corresponding odds for each candidate. Among them, Fudge's odds reached 5, which can be said to be the highest. It is hard to imagine that he is. How did you end up winning the election? Is this wonderful event for real? Will it be awarded later and won't be paid? Peter asked curiously. This is an event organized by the Daily Prophet and the Ministry of Magic. It has been held before, so the credibility is still high. Alan explained, and then looked at him in surprise. Why, do you want to play note? It looks very interesting. I want to put some money to try, maybe I will win. Peter said casually. He is now lying in Gringotts with 100,000 gold galleons, but he is not short of money, but this kind of he doesn't mind making a little bit of money delivered to his door. Gambling is not a good habit, Peter. Flora Shacklebolt reminded him, frowning. I just put in a few hundred galleons to try, and if I lose, it's just a few days' worth of candy money, don't worry. Peter said with a smile. Damn rich people. The two swallowed their saliva in envy. Their pocket money can have 1 galleon a month, which is very good among all students. In the wizarding world, 1 gold galleon equals 17 silver sick, 1 sick equals 29 nat, that is, 1 galleon equals 493 nat. When Peter included all the snacks on the train when he was enrolled in school, he only spent about 1 galleon. And at the Three Broomsticks pub in Hogsmeade, butterbeer costs 2 silos a glass. 1 serving of the Daily Prophet costs 5 nuts. And the price of the most important weapon and wand of wizards is around 7 galleons. You can see the price level of the magic world. So Peter has 100,000 gold galleons in Gringotts, which can be said to be a local tyrant. You must know that the current time is 1989. At this time, in the distant eastern country, the per capita wage level is only 161 yuan, which is less than 15 pounds. That is 3 galleons. Many pure-blood families don't have as much money as Peter. Of course, the background of more than 10 generations of pure-blood families is incomparable to the current Peter. Especially those magic books and magic items that cannot be measured by money, are beyond the reach of ordinary people. Something touched. Under the envious eyes of the two, Peter took out a pile of gold galleons from the animal skin pocket, counted 200 gold galleons, and put them in another small bag. Wrote his name and address on a blank piece of parchment, placed a bet on Fudge's name, then borrowed Alan's owl, and sent the purse with galleons and the quiz envelope to the Daily Prophet. Peter, why are you betting on Fudge alone? He is the one with the highest odds, and even the Daily Prophet thinks his odds of winning are very small. You can't spend money like this. Alan looked surprised. When Peter put all 200 galleons on Fudge, he said with a pity. Apparently he thinks Peter's money is wasted. It's okay, maybe I can still win, but it will be 1,000 galleons. I had a dream last night that Fudge became a minister. Maybe this is still a prophetic dream. Peter joked with a smile. You don't have the blood of a prophet, and you still have a dream of prophecy. You tease me. Alan looked disbelieving. Man, what were you doing just now? We heard the sound of gin galleons colliding at the Gryffindor long table. The twins ran directly to Peter's side, sat down, and asked with a smile on his shoulders. Peter said he had a dream last night that Fudge became a minister, so he spent 200 galleons betting that he could win. Alan explained, because of Peter's relationship, he was already familiar with the Weasley brothers, so there was no previous so distant. Merlin, Peter, did you really invest so much money? The twins said in disbelief. The money was already astronomical for them. Since listening to Peter's advice, going to Hogsmeade to buy snacks and prank props, etc., and taking them back to school to sell to their classmates, the Weasley brothers have earned more than 20 galleons. This has made them very happy. They have never made so much money, and decided to keep the business alive. But now, in front of these 200 galleons, it seems a bit not enough. Yeah, just give it a try, it doesn't matter if you make money or not. Peter said with a smile. You also think Peter is making a fool of himself, right? He can't spend money like this, Alan said to the twins. As Peter's roommate and friend, he felt that he should persuade Peter well, in case one day he would take it out. All the money is lost. Not to mention the twins' reaction, Alan White couldn't react in time. The two Weasley brothers looked at each other, made eye contact silently, and then said directly, then let's play too. Just follow Peter to bet on Fudge to win. What? Alan was dumbfounded. Why are these two crazy? They have to bet with Peter. Peter was also stunned for a moment, then shook his head in disapproval and said, you guys don't play, I have this spare money, but your hard-earned money, don't mess around. We trust your intuition. Don't worry, even if you lose money, you'll be fine. You can make money later. The two brothers shook their heads and said, since Peter accidentally showed disguise mags in front of them last night, they felt that Peter was more and more mysterious. And they feel that Peter is a person who is not willing to suffer losses, so they feel that either Peter really has the ability to predict, or he has learned important information from where, and determined that Fudge will win, so he did such a throwing money thing. So you'll never lose out if you follow Peter. Peter looked at the two brothers who insisted on betting, shook his head disapprovingly, and did not persuade any more. Just thinking that the two brothers are very gambling and will suffer in the future. It's just that he didn't start reading minds at this time, and he didn't know what the brothers were thinking now, otherwise they would be dumbfounded. Can you say that they believed Peter too much? The twins took out 20 gold galleons and bet them on Fudge, and they only had 5 galleons left. Peter looked at them speechlessly, thinking about the scene when they got 100 galleons in the future. Although he knew that they would probably make money this time, Peter still poured cold water and said, if Fudge fails to run for Minister of Magic, you will regret it. The twins didn't care, giggled, and invited Peter to their house for Christmas. I'm afraid I don't have time. I've already received a letter from my family. The Queen is holding a banquet for Christmas, and I need to go. Peter shook his head and said, I'll visit your house when I have time. Queen, Peter, you are going to the Muggle royal banquet. Several people looked at Peter in surprise. Although they had lived in the wizarding world since childhood, they still knew the story of Merlin and King Arthur, and were very surprised that Peter could attend such a banquet. Looking at the surprised looks of his friends, he explained, I have a title of nobility in the Muggle world, and I have a little blood relationship with the royal family, so I was included in the invitation list. 9. In fact, Peter was also very surprised when he received a letter from the housekeeper Wales and his aunt. After all, their York family had not been in contact with the royal family for a long time, and they were not keen on attending noble gatherings. It's just that this time I suddenly received an invitation to the royal family's Christmas dinner, and the Queen personally invited Peter by name. In modern society, the British royal family is only a symbolic existence and has no real power, but the government still gives it corresponding respect, and every year it takes part of the money from the national tax to support the royal family, so the social status of the royal family is still quite high. Aunt Christine and housekeeper Welsh both suggested that he agree to the invitation, and Peter was also curious about the reason why the Queen invited him, so he agreed to the dinner. Q equals %. Soon, Christmas will come. The Christmas holiday at Hogwarts begins before Christmas and ends after New Year's. Students at the school can choose to stay at Hogwarts Castle, or go home for the holidays. Before the holidays, the deans of the various colleges will collect the list of students who will stay on campus for Christmas. But Slytherin didn't stay on campus this time, they all chose to go home for the festival, so when Peter packed up his things and came out, the common room was already empty, everyone was eager to go home and his family reunion. Outside the castle, roommates Alan White, Cedric, and the Weasley twins are all waiting for him. Peter, what are you doing so dawdling? Everyone else is done. The Hogwarts Express is about to leave, get up, shouted George from the carriage. Peter hurriedly handed the luggage in his hand to several people in the carriage, and then jumped on it himself, explaining, I washed the photos I took with Developer Solution, and finally came over after finishing it. After sitting firmly, Peter took out a stack of photos and showed them to them. All of them were photos taken in their life and study. After using the developer potion, the people in the photos came to life, waving to them happily. Several people looked at the photo with relish. George, look at this picture, it's the embarrassment when you were entangled by the big octopus, haha, it's so funny. And this one was taken when Filch was chasing us. Peter, when did you take it? I don't remember seeing you at that time. Fred asked in surprise while looking at the photo. Peter, why are you taking so many photos? You use a lot of developer potion. I remember that a bottle of potion costs 5 galleons. Cedric asked curiously, there are at least hundreds of these photos. I took these pictures to take back to my family. They were all muggles and had never seen Hogwarts, Peter explained. Peter, you have to be careful, don't let these photos be seen by other muggles except your family. Otherwise the Ministry of Magic will get you into trouble, Alan reminded solemnly. Indeed, because of secrecy laws, the Ministry of Magic does not allow muggles to know too much about the wizarding world, Cedric explained. If he knows too much, the Ministry of Magic will use the Oblivion Charm to make him forget it. Backquote, my dad worked in the misuse of Muggle articles department, and he often worked overtime to prevent some magicians from casting magic on Muggle articles and exposing the secrets of the wizarding world, Fred said. Hearing the friendly reminders from his friends, Peter nodded. He smiled and said, thank you for your reminder, but I will pay attention, and I only have my aunt and housekeeper Wales in my family. We live in the manor, so generally no one will disturb us. By the way, aren't you curious, how does this carriage move by itself? Is it magic? George asked curiously, looking at the carriage he was moving. Everyone was aroused by her words, and they all stretched out their heads and looked at the front of the carriage. There was nothing to pull, but the carriage still moved forward steadily. Maybe these carriages are alchemy products, Alan said with speculation. If you want me to say, some professor must have cast magic on these carriages. Either Professor Flitwick, or Professor Dumbledore, the good Jow. They have a lot of magic, George vowed. These wagons are pulled by animals, you just can't see them. Peter couldn't help but explain listening to their speculations. It's an invisible animal. What's its name? How come I've never heard of it? Fred asked in surprise. The name of this animal is Thestral, and only people who have seen death can see them. So, they are invisible to ordinary people, Peter explained. I have heard of this animal. It is said that this animal is close to death and is an unknown species. How can the school let this animal come and pull us a cart? Alan said in horror. And Len, you said it too, it's a legend. Peter quickly reassured. Thestrals are actually a very docile animal. They have lived in Hogwarts for a long time, and have not seen anything people have an accident, so don't worry. Peter, can you see Thestrals? What do they look like? George asked curiously as Peter kept looking forward. I can't see it either, after all, I haven't seen death. But from the description in the book, they have a dragon's head and a horse's body, but there is no flesh on their bodies. The black fur is tightly attached to the bones, and there are a pair of large and black bat wings ia half. Peter shook his head, saying that he had never seen it before, and repeated the description in the book. Listening to Peter's description, several people hurriedly moved to the back seat of the car, trying to get away from this animal pulling the car. After all, the appearance sounded terrifying. The carriage hurried, and finally arrived at the railway station. Several people jumped out of the carriage and quickly boarded the Hogwarts express train that was already whistling. With the start of the train, the distant Hogwarts castle gradually disappeared from everyone's eyes. What are you going to do during Christmas? My parents are taking me on a trip to France, Alan asked first. My dad works in the Department of Magical Creatures at the Ministry of Magic, and he will probably work overtime except on Christmas Day when he can come back to accompany us. So he can only stay at home, Cedric said shyly. We can only stay at home. During Christmas, my dad's Muggle Products Abuse Department is often so busy that he can't come back at night, George said with disappointment. Immediately, everyone looked at Peter and said enviously, Peter, your Christmas holiday is the coolest. It must be very interesting to go to the Queen's banquet. Actually, the banquet was very boring. Everyone greeted each other with their faces on their faces, smiling hypocritically, and couldn't show any pretense. If you were allowed to go, it would be very uncomfortable within a few minutes. Peter shook his head, puncturing it. Their fantasy. Children, do you have anything you want to buy? A middle-aged chubby lady pushed a snack cart and pushed aside the boxes to ask them. Ms. Frome, please give me a portion of every snack. Forced to take out a gold galleon, he said to the woman with a smile. It's Mr. York, long time no see. Our Honey Duke has a new candy, it's honey apple flavor, you can try it. The fat woman kindly said to Peter. She is the proprietress of the Honey Duke shop, and she is very enthusiastic about Peter, a big customer. After Mrs. Frome left, the table was already full of piles of things. Peter said boldly, everyone, you're welcome, eat them all, I'll treat you. George swallowed and said, Peter, there are so many snacks that we can't finish them all. It's a waste. It's okay, I picked some and took them home and gave them to my aunt to taste. They have never been in contact with these things and are more curious about them. Peter said that he picked out some more normal things. As for the bloody lollipops that smelled like blood, and the prank candies that could burn through the tongue, he didn't dare to bring them back, otherwise they might think that the magical world is so terrifying, and they would suffer if they didn't let him go back to Hogwarts. With the help of snacks, everyone chatted about some embarrassing things about the students of their respective colleges while eating snacks, and laughed from time to time. Among them is a candy that, when eaten, makes people make animal sounds. Everyone was interested in trying what kind of animal their candy would be. Among them, Peter was the first to try, and as a result, the sound he made was a cuckoo sound, and the cuckoo kept calling. It made everyone else laugh. Of course, the Weasley brothers did not let go of such an interesting candy. The two took out candy from the candy box at the same time, and then gave each other a dignified expression of generosity and death, and gave each other a glass of wine. Then George's voice was a baboon, and Fred's was a pig. The two were not ashamed but proud, and while the effect was still in place, they jumped up in a funny way, and kept making baboons and pigs. The bark, especially Fred's pig's bark, he made it sound like he was about to be killed, it was deafening. It made the students next door think they were killing pigs here. Although the twins are sometimes noisy, they are always full of talent for being funny, and they make everyone laugh. After Alan ate the candy, he let out a few roars, and then covered his mouth and didn't speak. Gryffindor roared as the twins laughed at him, a Slytherin student, AC/DC. When it was Cedric's turn, he was unlucky to win the grand prize. He was flushed with suffocation, and his ears kept spewing water vapor, making a whining sound, interacting with the moving Hogwarts Express, Echo. After playing for a long time, the train finally stopped slowly at platform 9 3/4, and the students got off one after another and said goodbye to each other. At this time, there was a large flow of wizard students, and the guards had to stop a swarm of wizards who wanted to go out to avoid being seen by the muggles outside the platform. Both Alan and Cedric's parents came to the platform to pick them up, so they just had to apparate with their parents and didn't need to go through the wall. After saying goodbye to the two friends, only Peter and the twins were left on the platform, waiting in a hard line to get out through the wall. Hey brother, you promised us at the beginning, shouldn't you forget it? The three of them were about to turn, and the twins suddenly took him to the corner and asked. What did I promise? Peter didn't turn around for a while, he couldn't remember what he promised them. Transformation, your disguise Magus, our three brothers club. The two brothers solemnly reminded them with expressions like how you forgot. Oh, Peter remembered, he had promised them, but he said hesitantly, to tease Mrs. Weasley like this, will she not like me, or not, it's rude. Oh, brother, don't worry if you don't. My mother won't be angry with you even if she is angry. You are a model student in my mother's eyes. When she wrote to us earlier, she wanted us to learn from you. What? Fred said with a look that you don't have to worry about. Then I can't do it. Otherwise Mrs. Weasley might think I've ruined you. Peter shook his head resolutely. Woo, Peter, you promised us, but now you've gone back on it. It hurts our hearts. The twins complained loudly in a weird tone with the expression that you failed me. Peter looked at the wizards who were looking around, and he wanted to disappear immediately. These two guys were really annoying. He said quickly, I promise, I promise. As soon as they heard Peter's promise, the two of them stopped howling, and a mean person took him by the shoulder and said, if you promised earlier, you'll be fine. Hurry up, it's our turn to go out, hurry up and become our look. Seeing the two brothers put on a posture that he is not allowed to go if he doesn't do it, he rolled his eyes at them helplessly, then took a deep breath, and then his body went numb, and in a blink of an eye he turned into a George, or Fred. Is that all right, Peters? George asked angrily. Perfect. The twins gave each other high fives with delight as they looked at what Peter had become. In the surprised eyes of the guards, Weasley, triplets, rushed towards the wall and came to London Railway Cross Station in a blink of an eye. Following the twins out of the wall, the image of the triplets was too eye-catching, and instantly attracted all the nearby muggles to them, and a few muggles looked at them suspiciously because they found these three children. It suddenly appeared in front of the wall, and I was curious to come forward to see how they appeared. At this time, an ill-dressed Ministry of Magic personnel hurriedly cast an oblivion charm on several muggles to make them forget about it. Look, it's Mom and the others. Ronald and Ginny are here. George pointed to the distance, and then said to Peter with a smile, "You'll follow us later to scare Ronald. I haven't seen you for so long. I'm all for it thinking of him. I'm not used to seeing the way he was so frightened that his butt was urinating." Peter directly rolled his eyes. "Ronald has your two brothers, he is down, bad luck for 8 lifetimes. Mom, they're there, Fred and they're there." Ginny shouted at Mrs. Weasley in surprise, shaking her hands, trotting over, and was surprised to find 3 identical brother. Then he quickly shouted behind him, "Mom, George and Fred have become 3. They have become 3. Ronald also ran over, then looked at the 3 with a ghostly expression, and asked naively, "Fred, George, how did you become 3? Is it magic? Can you teach me?" "I'm afraid this won't work," Fred said with a wicked smile, pretending to be the aftermath of the disaster. "This is the aftermath of our entrance exam. When I was assigned to fight with trolls, I was unfortunately smashed into 2 pieces. Cut. Madame Pomfrey from the school infirmary put 2 drops of potion on my wound, and the 2 parts of the body grew together, and there was an extra Fred. So our little baby Ronnie, you have another brother in the future. Are you happy?" George said with a smile. "We Weasley twins will officially be renamed triplets in the future." Still 9-year-old Ronald foolishly believed it, and asked with a look of horror, "The entrance exam is so scary. Do I have to fight trolls when I enter school?" Then he turned his head and shouted at Mrs. Weasley in horror. Said, "Mom, I won't go to Hogwarts in the future. It's horrible there." Peter looked at the twins quietly high fives in celebration, and shook his head speechlessly. How could he scare his own younger brother so much? "George, Fred, what good things have you done?" Mrs. Weasley came over with a headache. She had just asked Charlie and Percy to look at the car when she heard Ronald shouting in horror not to go to Hogwarts. No, how the mischievous dudes are making fun of Ronald. "Ah, what's going on? Fred, George, how did you become 3? Mrs. Weasley wanted to talk about twins, but when she saw 3 identical people standing in front of her, she was a little dumbfounded. "Oh, Mom is like this." Fred rolled his eyes and said with a surprised expression, "Mom, this is our exiled brother. He has been looking for his family all these years. Entered Hog after Waz. We found out that he looked exactly like the 2 of us, so we knew each other. Yes, in fact, we are triplets." George also said with a side tone, "Mom, when you gave birth to us at St. Mungo's Hospital, you should have accidentally left one, causing our 3 brothers to be separated for many years." Quote. Looking at the 3 identical people and Fred George's affirmative expression, Mrs. Weasley was a little stunned, and began to wonder if she had really left a child. After all, it looks so similar. Just as Mrs. Weasley carefully recalled the details of the twins, she did not find the 2 brothers snickering as if they had succeeded. Peter silently watched the Weasley family being played around by the twins, hurried forward, changed back to his original form, and explained to Mrs. Weasley, "I'm sorry, Mrs. Weasley, don't listen to their nonsense. It's just a prank." Wow. The Weasley family looked at one of the triplets, who had been silent for a while, stepped forward, slowly turned into a handsome blonde boy, and looked at him in amazement for a while. "Peter, he's Peter York. The Merlin Medal winner who caught 2 dark wizards." Ginny screamed in surprise, as if she had seen an idol. "Ginny, isn't your idol Harry Potter? How did you become Peter? It's not good to change your mind so easily," George said to his sister with a smile, and then looked at Peter with some regret. "You told the truth so early and let him. It's such a pity that our original grand plan fell into disrepair." Peter just rolled his eyes. If they really messed up, they would be beaten by Mrs. Weasley, but his image in the Weasley family might be ruined. George Fred, if you continue to talk nonsense and pranks like this, let's see how I will deal with you. Mrs. Weasley, who understood that she had been tricked, scolded the two of them with an angry akimbo, then turned her head and said to Peter kindly, "Son, your name is Peter, right? You were dragged here by the two troublemakers. What a handsome guy. How did you do it just now? Can you teach me?" Ronald looked at Peter adoringly and asked eagerly. "Don't be rude, Ronald," Mrs. Weasley reprimanded, and then said to Peter with a smile on her face, "Your disguise magus, right? It's a rare talent. It's amazing to be able to transform your whole body at such a young age. Incredible." "Mom, how did you know?" the twins asked in surprise. They didn't expect that their mother, a housewife, would recognize it so easily. "Your brother Bill's classmate, Nymphadora Tonks, is a disguised magus who can change her appearance in an instant. She is now an intern in the Auror department. Her parents are very good friends with us," Weasley the lady explained. "Why don't we have such talent? This kind of ability is so suitable for the two of us. Is it for you guys to play pranks? Besides, it's a genetic talent, and the Weasley family has never seen disguise magus." Mrs. Weasley rolled them a glance, and now it's enough to give her a headache. If there really is such a thing, if you are talented, you can't jump around. "Isn't Peter a muggle? Where did he get his inheritance?" the twins asked rhetorically. "How do I know? Maybe his ancestors have wizards." "Don't ask so much. Charlie and Percy have been waiting outside for a long time. Hurry up." Mrs. Weasley hammered her two troubled sons, and quickly urged. Then she invited Peter gently and kindly. "Peter, if you have time, come to our house. We will welcome you very much." "Thank you, Mrs. Weasley. I will definitely come when I have time. After all, I have never been to a wizarding family," Peter said with a decent smile. "What a polite boy. Fred and George will be troubled by you in the future at school," said Mrs. Weasley. "See you next year, Peter." The twins said goodbye with a smile as they left. Peter was stunned for a moment, then laughed. It was indeed the new year when he went back to school, and it was time to see him next year. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.